Hey, yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Free Agency Funhouse. It is here on Fantasy Pros. It is me, Joe Pisapia. That's Mike Tagliere. You know him as Tags. He likes to go by that moniker. And we're going to break it all down for you here. Everything that's been going on for the last few days in terms of NFL free agent signings. And there's been a lot of them going on. There's still many more to come. We're going to come to you live here for the next 2 hours from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern to make sure you're watching us over on the YouTube channel, which is Fantasy Pros, obviously. That's very easy to remember. And Mike, it's been a very busy couple days, obviously, and there's still more to come, a few big names still to drop. So far, have you been able to kind of breathe and take it all in and kind of digest all of this player moving? Because we've had a bunch of it.
Yeah, it's been a really slow moving one though. I mean, there's been a lot of signings, but I think some of the biggest names that are still out there, people are waiting on. And I think that once you see one of those big wide receivers sign, I don't know if I'd consider Corey Davis. I didn't consider him in that top tier, but once you see one of those guys sign, I think you're going to see the market set for the rest of them. So it's actually been slower than I thought. The running backs, none of those guys have signed right now. So we're kind of waiting on the chips to fall. A lot of defensive guys are starting to sign. We're seeing more and more signings, but it's been a lot of second tier wide receivers. So I'm just kind of waiting on one of those big guys to sign, like a Kenny Golladay. We've been hearing rumors over the last hour that Golladay is getting closer to signing, and that there's rumors that it's going to be in the NFC East. Could that be Washington? Could it be New York? We're going to find out really soon.
Yeah, we absolutely are. And make sure you're following us on Twitter at Fantasy Pros. And of course, at Fantasy Pros, the news app as well. Fantasy News by Fantasy Pros is the app. You can go get it at the Apple App Store or Google Play, and you can keep up to date with all of the latest going on. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Fantasy Pros also. And just a shout out to everybody behind the scenes over at Fantasy Pros, who's part of that news desk that's been reporting and analyzing all of these free agent moves that have gone on. As Mike said, maybe not the premium guys quite yet. Hopefully in the next 2 hours, we'll get some of those guys. But in the meantime, there have been so much movement, and they've done such a great job. I know Yates has been doing write-ups. You've been doing write-ups. The whole team of Fantasy Pros has been kind of doing the quick reactions to everything, whether it be video versions or whether it be the actual, diving deep already into the articles. And have you really had one favorite thing so far that's happened that you've gotten to write about? And I'm guessing it's not Andy Dalton. Just throwing that out there.
No, I actually refused to write that piece.
I know you
did. Dalton signed, and I was like, "Can I have someone else write that? Because I don't want to do it." In reality, it doesn't have a big fantasy impact in terms of what Andy Dalton brings to you. Does it change Allen Robinson a little bit? Not so much. I mean, Allen Robinson's getting plenty of targets. I'm not worried about Allen Robinson, no matter who his quarterback is. It was more, is this the final move for the Bears? Because I think signing Andy Dalton to a 1-year, $10 million deal doesn't really negate them from finding another quarterback in terms of whether it be the draft or a trade. Adam Schefter came out today and said Russell Wilson he does not believe the book is closed on that yet. And Pete Carroll did like Andy Dalton back in the draft process. So it's possible that the Bears are like, hey, we have our plan at quarterback. It's not ideal, but if Seattle should change their mind, it could be Andy Dalton going back to Seattle in a trade, because they would need a quarterback to replace Russell Wilson. So it's definitely a situation worth monitoring. Was there a favorite signing? There was, but it changed over the course of a couple hours. I loved Jonnu Smith going over to the New England Patriots. He was someone that I was excited as a top 10 tight end. I believe the talent is still just, I don't think people realize just how good Jonnu Smith can be and is. But then all of a sudden we start seeing all these wide receivers sign, and then we see Hunter Henry sign there. And it's kind of like, there are too many chefs in one kitchen right now, and there are only so many targets to go around. So honestly, I think there's more defensive signings than anything, and I'm sure we're going to talk about those today. But from an offensive standpoint, I don't think so much has changed for a whole lot of players just yet.
And what's fascinating too, we're going to get into, is how the cap this year as opposed to next year is affecting some of these signings in different ways and some of the front-loaded money. So we're going to break all that down, including all the many, many things going on with the New England Patriots. But before we go ahead and do that, I want to remind everybody we've got a giveaway going on. Fantasy Pros, go to fantasypros.com/contest. We're giving away, thanks to our friends at pristineauction.com, a signed Lamar Jackson jersey. It is so easy to get involved and to get that. All you got to do is go to your favorite platform, Apple Podcasts, CastBox. You take a screenshot of a wonderful glowing review of the podcast and all the work we do here at Fantasy Pros. Hopefully it's a wonderful review. We would like that. And then you go back to fantasypros.com/contest, and then you go upload that, fill out this form, and boom, you are then automatically entered in that contest to win that free Lamar Jackson autographed jersey. Doesn't get much better than that. So make sure you go do that while you're listening and watching us here on YouTube Live on our channel. And let's start with those Patriots. And let's start here with what's gone on, because if you look at the front loading, or should I say the back loading of these contracts, that they've done here in New England, with obviously knowing, Tags, that next year there's going to be a bump in the salary cap, they've structured things in a way where they still got some room to play, which I think is very interesting. And obviously the first piece, which we've analyzed already, but we should come back to it and start there, is the bringing back of Cam Newton into the fold again. So I want to start with the quarterback and kind of work our way out with the rest of these signings, because there were a lot with New England. And with Cam Newton, do you believe that it's just a matter of, well, yeah, COVID made him in the second half less relevant. He didn't recover very well. Yeah, he didn't have the proper offseason. You can make all these excuses. But at the end of the day, Tags, do you think that that's exactly what they are, and they are excuses? Or do you think that there is actually some truth to, well, you know what, it is a very sophisticated offense. It does take a little while to figure it out. He didn't have the proper preparation time, nor did he have the weapons to really make things work. So which kind of side do you lay on? And you could even say the middle. It's possible there too. So where do you land with trying to figure out what to make of Cam Newton now back with the Patriots?
I mean, are people making these same excuses for Jarrett Stidham that they're making for Cam Newton?
Because, no, but Jarrett Stidham also doesn't have an MVP. Jarrett Stidham also doesn't have fantasy relevance that Cam Newton did have. And although Cam Newton had plenty of warts as a passer, even in his Carolina days, he made up for it with his athleticism. And even this past year, in the first 6 weeks of the season, you could argue he did that. But then again, there was some exposure level in terms of looking downfield, being able to get the progressions right. But progressions to who? Who was getting open? What did that offense really have? And it is very chicken and egg, Mike.
That's my point, though, is that, people talk about, who would have succeeded in this offense and Cam Newton's weapons and this and that. And in reality, Cam Newton's never been a great passer. So I don't think, if you supply him with Antonio Brown, do you think Antonio Brown's going to be a wide receiver one in fantasy football? I don't. But it's basically, they're trying to surround him with the most weapons possible. He was another guy that signed a one-year deal similar to Andy Dalton, where it doesn't get rid of the fact that the Patriots can get another quarterback. If they're able to trade for Jimmy Garoppolo, if they're able to trade for Deshaun Watson, it should never go away because you have Cam Newton on your roster. Now, they did pay him a handsome, what was it, $18 million, I think is what it came out to. So it does seem like he's going to be the starter. I wouldn't be shocked if they grab a quarterback. If there is one there at 15, maybe a Mac Jones is sitting on the board at 15. That's possible, but it seems likely that someone's going to trade up for him for whatever reason. But am I excited about Cam Newton? I don't know. I mean, I never had faith as a passer in him, and he's really only shown it one time. He's thrown more than 24 touchdowns one time in his entire career. So it's not like he's going to, support a whole lot of fantasy relevant players, pass catchers. And now it's like you add Jonnu Smith, you add Hunter Henry, you add Nelson Aguilar, you add Kendrick Bourne. And it's like, these are just a bunch of pieces. Like I love Jonnu Smith, but he's not a superstar. He is not. I'm surprised they didn't try and go out and get Kenny Galladay. Galladay's at least a guy that you could throw up the ball into in contested catch situations. He could win those catches. Corey Davis is another guy I thought they may have been interested in, just because these guys are guys that can out-muscle their competition. Nelson Aguilar is not that guy. Kendrick Bourne, not that guy. I haven't liked what New England has done from a wide receiver standpoint for years. Drafting N'Keal Harry I thought was a terrible pick. I don't think Cam Newton, I don't think the receivers that they have on this team they're suited to make Cam Newton better. Do I think Jonnu Smith can help? I sure do. But do I think that's going to propel him back to finishing as a top 5 fantasy quarterback like he used to be? No, I don't. Because I think we're going to start to lose some of that appeal that he had mobility wise, where, he'd score double-digit touchdowns every year. That's going to go away. We have to be prepared for that. And that's the part of the reason that the Patriots only gave him a 1-year deal, because they're not really committed to him right now. So, I mean, they did spend a lot of money. The part I like most about what the Patriots did in free agency is that they allowed them to go in a multitude of different ways in the first round of the draft, because they're going to get there. We have no idea who's going to be there at 15 for them, but they've grabbed players because of the wide receivers that they grabbed. I don't think that we should scratch off if one of the top wide receivers like a Jalen Waddle or a Devonta Smith, if they're on the board, I don't think the Patriots should pass on a player like that, but they probably will. But adding the tight ends that's not a need anymore. Grabbing Henry Anderson, Matthew Judon, Devon Godchaux, these are guys that they've added so that they can kind of go anywhere they want in free agency. Jalen Mills is another whatever, but I think the Patriots can kind of just take best player available at 15, unless there's a quarterback there, of course, that they do like. But that's the thing I like most about what they did. But I really did feel like this was an off season where teams that had a lot of cap room could make big waves in terms of their franchise can be accelerated so much faster because players are going to have to accept less money because of the salary cap stuff.
Right.
And you can get players cheaper than you actually should have. So do I think that they did that? I really can't say. I don't think they did. But they have to hit in the draft. They have to start getting better in the draft because they've missed on quite a few draft picks, especially on that offensive side of the ball.
Well, I want to touch on something that you said, and I want to investigate a little bit further and whether or not it's a legitimate knock or not. You mentioned that Cam Newton only had 24 touchdowns passing ever. That was the high watermark for him.
He had one year higher than that, the MVP season.
The MVP season, right? So outside of that, is it fair because you can go back and look, and there's years where he has 8 rushing touchdowns and things like that, just because of the style of play that he has. Is that a fair, is passing touchdowns necessarily, I could say, the best way to look at Cam Newton and his deficits? Or is it easier to look back and say, well, you know what? That's a different, you can't really judge him by passing touchdowns because of the style of play, but can we now, as he gets older, kind of set back and find better ways to maybe, utilize him in the red zone that aren't necessarily all Cam Newton just running the football in? Because we saw a lot of that last year too, and he was still very capable. In fact, he was more capable than I thought he was going to be at it. So I don't want to knock him for not hitting high passing marks, but do you think that's fair? Do you think that's the fair knock on him is passing touchdowns?
Well, it's from a fantasy angle. I think we do have to knock his pass catchers for that. Not necessarily Cam, because him himself, we never relied on his passing numbers. We drafted him because of his mobility and what
he's only had. Who has he had? Kelvin Benjamin. I mean, he hasn't had a who's who of great wide receivers in his career, even.
And he still doesn't. He still doesn't, though. That's what I'm saying. Nelson Aguilar is not going to change that. Kendrick Bourne is not going to change that. Jonnu Smith can be his Greg Olsen, basically, and Greg Olsen was a fantasy relevant option while in Carolina. So again, but if you watched, Joe, you're a Patriots fan. There's a reason that you were upset about Cam Newton signing with them.
Yes, again. There was.
It wasn't just about, him maybe not having pinpoint accuracy. It was terrible at times where you sat back and looked and said, this is the best we could do. Like, really, this is the best we could do.
I looked at it as an opportunity to take a shot with a guy in a 1-year deal to see how much fire he had to kind of, and I always feel like that's always in the NFL, especially, here's a 1-year show me deal where you can go out there and really kind of put on a show. And I understand there were a lot of things and deficits around that, and that made it difficult for him to get off to a good start, but he actually got off to a decent start, and it did get worse throughout the year. And I'm with you. I do agree. I'm just kind of throwing that out there because I think when you look at touchdown totals for such a mobile red zone quarterback, it does kind of, pull back your expectations anyway. It would pull them back with even a Lamar Jackson year over year when you look at that. Let's talk about the tight ends that signed there. I'm actually still quite bullish on Jonnu Smith, and I made the comment yesterday to you when we were talking about it, where I feel like, Jonnu Smith's 24-hour value went through the roof. Like, it went so high, and then the Hunter Henry signing happened, and it came back down to earth. And I feel like that was actually the best case scenario because I still think Jonnu Smith is that weapon that Bill Belichick has identified and sees an enormous upside. You talked about it in the last show when you and I were together too about, man, the upside of getting Jonnu Smith and how much Belichick thinks he can make of him, and tight ends as they're hitting 25 years old and have been in the league a couple of years, just kind of exploding. There's that opportunity there with Smith, and they are a team that likes to do different things where they're going to throw the 2 tight ends a year. They're going to use formations that you're not used to. They're going to use the tools they have and create an offense around the weapons they have, which is something they've done time and time again, and so many different incarnations under Brady in those 20 years he was there. Is this just a different incarnation, and should we be afraid of Hunter Henry being there as much as some other people are?
I'm afraid of it for sure, just because there's limited targets to go around. I highlighted this because I wrote up a Jonnu Smith article when he signed, and I was bullish on him, even though, Cam Newton, there's been just 2 times in his career where he's thrown the ball more than 495 times. This team threw the ball 436 times last year. That was the second lowest behind only the Ravens. And again, with the pass catching core they had, with Cam Newton being behind the curve and all that stuff, I understand it, but let's not pretend they're going to be a pass first team. I think even if we bump that up 10% and say we go up to 480 pass attempts, even 500, and then you break down, what is the highest target share you see tight ends around the league get from a team standpoint, and typically that number is around 30%. So even if you do that, you're looking at 130, 140 targets combined for Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. It's not to say that they can't be fantasy relevant tight ends during that time, but you need one to outpace the other, because if they both wind up with 65 targets, it does nobody any good because they're just streamers at that point. You can't rely on a tight end that's not not getting consistent 5 targets per game. So again, I was excited about Jonnu Smith, and I think part of this comes back to, are they going to re-sign James White? And it seems unlikely. It seems like he's been talking to Tampa Bay, which always made sense for him to go reunite with Brady. They need a pass catcher out of the backfield. If they lose James White, they're dropping off, a guy that's seeing probably about 70 targets in the offense. That clears up a lot of room, and it allows that best case scenario to throw 480, 500 pass attempts and have 30% of them go to the tight ends. But again, the reason that I'm with you in terms of like Jonnu Smith being the one that you want in fantasy over Hunter Henry is because they prioritized him. Okay. They went out and they got him on the first day of free agency. They paid him. They had a longer him, more guaranteed money, all that stuff. And again, Bill Belichick has continually, whenever he got the chance to talk about Jonnu Smith, the guy glowed. It's almost like, finding out a girl's like, you're talking about a girl that's dating someone and you're like,
she's so great. Now she's single. Yeah.
She becomes single and it's like, I'm going to go get her. He wanted to go get Jonnu Smith, and where Hunter Henry was kind of like, okay, we'll grab him too. We got money. Let's do it. I mean, he's another pass catcher. It's fine. But I repeat, do not compare these two to Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez, because
no, it's not fair, because no one's Gronk anyway.
First, Gronk is the best tight end of all time. Second, Aaron Hernandez was a versatile, like he was a guy that you can move up. You can line him at running back and fullback, tight end, wide receiver, whatever you wanted.
Well, will they run? No, but is Jonnu Smith a guy that you could see line up as wide receiver at times?
You can. He's a guy that you can get the ball get the ball in his hands, basically.
That's what I'm saying. Because of his yards after catch are so good, I wonder if that is a scenario where they look at it and say, well, what a matchup disaster if we can get Jonnu Smith out there lined up as a wide receiver instead of Hunter Henry there. My goodness, if you have a team, a defense that you're playing that has bad linebacker coverage, all of a sudden, man, that opens things in a lot. It is a matchup disaster, especially teams that have bad safety play. Also, you bring those guys up and they can't cover anybody either. Man, talk about the mismatches you can create. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's just a bunch of mismatches. But I think what Tags is telling you is that you got to kind of pump the brakes a little bit now on both of these guys until you see how it kind of flashes out. Is that basically how you feel?
Unfortunately, yes. And Hunter Henry is somebody I won't draft because, again, I think Jonnu Smith's the guy. Fair. And if he's getting, let's call it 70 targets, that only leaves 60 for Henry. It's not, and that's in the best case scenario. So my advice to you guys listening is that Hunter Henry is someone who he's going to be on my do not draft list. Jonnu Smith is a guy you can take a shot on the later rounds, find out what you got the first couple weeks, but he's not, believe me when I say, even if Hunter Henry is close to a timeshare, it's not going to be enough for him to be relevant week in, week out. So, but again, going back to the whole Rob Gronkowski, Aaron Hernandez thing, when those two were superstars, when they were guys that you could draft every year as top 5, top 6 tight ends, Brady was there, best quarterback of all time, and he was throwing the ball 610 times a season. I mean, again, that's not happening with Cam Newton. His career
and with
high,
incredible precision too. I mean, he was one of he is still one of the great precision quarterbacks you'll ever see, and that is something very different. Now, I also wonder if with these two tight ends, is there a simplification maybe that they're trying to build in for Cam Newton too, and not worrying about stretching the field so much, which brings us, I guess, to the two wide receivers, and then we'll move on past the Patriots. We had to start with the Pats because at a certain point, we looked up and we had to say, is there anybody who's not signing with the Patriots? Yeah. Because it seems like no one else is signing anywhere except New England. So these two wide receivers you've got here, Kendrick Bourne, who I've actually been a fan of Kendrick Bourne. I thought he was kind of miscast in San Francisco, to be honest with you. I don't think they really understood how to use him. I think he has some really good moments there regardless. And then Nelson Aguilar, who had a very fine season last year, but again, very efficient in small doses. So how do you factor these guys at all in terms of fantasy? Is this just like bench depth wide receivers in your mind, or is there actually some opportunity until, again, we have more clarity on who else they might draft or sign?
Well, Nelson Aguilar is the one that interests me from a fantasy perspective because I think that there's potential there, right? I mean, this guy was a first round pick. There was high expectations for him. Right. And if you go back, a lot of people talked about in Philadelphia, they had him in the slot and it seems like things were going well. And then all of a sudden they moved him out to the perimeter and things didn't go as well. And everybody's like, well, he's just a slot receiver. You got to get back in the slot. So people wanted to like them when they signed Alshon Jeffrey and they had Deshaun Jackson. It's like, oh, he could go back and play in the slot. And it was true early in his career where he was much better in the slot. I do a study every single year and it says how much are slot targets worth and which players depend on them more than others. Nelson Aguilar averaged almost a full fantasy point more on targets in the slot than he did on the perimeter. So it was clear that he was playing better there. But now that he went to Las Vegas and he played the way he did, I wanted to revisit that. And I wanted to go back and say, all right, how did he do? Where did they put him on the field? He was primarily a perimeter wide receiver with the Raiders. And in fact, he actually played better on the perimeter than he did in the slot. And then it brought me to think, Doug Peterson, as time went on, I think people started to realize maybe he wasn't the offensive mastermind there. Maybe it was Frank Reich. Maybe that was the guy that was calling the plays, that was getting the results that he needed out of those players. And if you look at the players that have succeeded in Philadelphia, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, Nelson Aguilar when he was in the slot, like you look at those players that are over the middle of the field. That's basically where it goes. So is this a Carson Wentz thing? Is it a Doug Peterson thing? Because all of a sudden, Nelson Aguilar goes outside. This is a guy that legitimately nobody wanted. They left him for dead. He signed a 1-year, $1 million contract, I think it was, with the Raiders. And everybody just said it. He's just a guy. The Raiders kept saying, we have plans for him. But it wasn't until Tyrell Williams was hurt, knocked out for the season. And then it wasn't until Bryan Edwards got hurt. He had to miss a few games. And it's like, okay, we're putting Zay Jones in there. And it's like, wait, what happened to Nelson Aguilar? Zay Jones sucked as he has since he came into the league, and they just re-signed him for whatever reason. And Nelson Aguilar worked his way onto the field. By week 5, I think that's when he officially was like, okay, he's a starter now, and he earned his way into that lineup. He played extremely well last year. He still had some problems with some drops, but again, this is a small sample size of what we have outside of Philadelphia. So is it possible that Nelson Aguilar is a really good receiver who is just miscast in Philadelphia in a dying franchise? Potentially. But then you go to New England and pump the brakes there too, because there's been a lot of wide receivers that have kind of gone there and not lived up to expectations. This is a team that traded a 2nd-round pick for Mohamed Sanu, and
don't remind me about these things. Why do you bring up these things to me? It hurts my soul when you say.
I'm a Bears fan, so you could bring up anything.
I know, yeah, I know. But believe me, I have a lot of winning in my life. I have zero. Look, I am a spoiled brat, and I recognize this, and I will never ever complain about my franchise. I know I've lived in the New York area most of my life. So I have a lot of Jet fan friends. So it is a whole different ball game. But Aguilar did have that run, Mike, where he was, was it like about 6 touchdowns in 7 games, basically, or something to that effect? I mean, it was quite a consistent run. Now, it wasn't high volume, but and the volume guy there is Darren Waller, clearly. But, I think what you're trying to say is there's potential there with Aguilar more than Kendrick Bourne or anything like that. So far, like of all the wide receivers that are now left when the dust settles, if indeed this is it heading into the draft, Aguilar is at least the guy on deeper leagues to circle in your draft board a little bit, maybe a late round pick.
Yeah, if you want to take a stab on him as maybe like a guy that you snag and say he's your wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, and kind of see what you got, I'm fine with that. But I wouldn't be drafting him as someone that you rely on, especially right now. Because again, I don't think that what they've put together at the wide receiver position tells us that they're not going to draft a wide receiver at 15, because they did go out and grab a bunch of guys on defense. And I think it gives them a lot of flexibility. So if you see a Jalen Waddle, if you see a Devonta Smith there at 15,
right.
Even Rashad Bateman, like these are players that they're versatile, and that's what the Patriots do.
They could go BPA, and that's I think when you're there in the draft, right? Is that where they are? 15, if memory serves.
Yeah, 15. Yep.
So if they're there at 15, you just go best player on the board. That's typically, there's teams that have been in that range the last few years have done well when they've done that instead of trying to feel necessarily the need, just take the best player. And even if it doesn't always make sense, it feels like that's where the Patriots have established themselves. I'm with you. I don't think Mac Jones is going to make it to them, but it feels like Mac Jones might be their kind of guy potentially. If it does, I think there's a possibility of that there. He fits that mold of if you surround him with enough and he makes good decisions. I know you've mentioned about him seeing ghosts and being a little concerned about him being a little, get the yips in the pocket a little bit, which is very fair. There's no doubt about that. But then again, the Pats have always had good offensive line play. So maybe that is something where he could be built for success. All right, enough Patriot talk here. Let's turn the page and start looking at some of the higher end free agents. Now, Kenny Golladay hasn't signed yet. So as of right now, we can kind of speculate. If I had to throw out to you where you think he might or where you might want him to be, where is the Kenny Golladay landing spot that would be just fantasy gold? Is it actually a place like Washington where he has another wide receiver to work off and Fitzpatrick, who we all know can throw the ball downfield? Or is there another landing spot for you that you think would be ideal for his fantasy value?
Well, it's tough to say right now because I think there was a report earlier in the week that a beat reporter was basically came out and said, I talked to one of these big name free agent wide receivers, and he informed his agent he wants a 1-year deal. And I don't know if it was Kenny Galladay. I don't know if it was Juju Smith-Schuster. I don't know who it was. But basically, it's a 1-year deal because they know that the salary cap is cut down. They expect it to rise next year. And is it Galladay? A short-term solution, Washington's the best case scenario because you have Terry McLaurin there, a guy that obviously demands his own attention. And then you have a quarterback like Ryan Fitzpatrick who's continually supporting wide receivers. You go back to the Jets, Brandon Marshall, Eric Decker, those guys were superstars every week. Devontae Parker, no one was able to get the most out of Devontae Parker. Well, Ryan Fitzpatrick was. So it's just keep the train moving. And now it's like if he goes here, Terry McLaurin's stock goes up. If Kenny Galladay were to go there, it would raise his stock because he had Matthew Stafford. Stafford's one of those guys where if you go and you look at NFL's next gen stats, Stafford's that guy that is willing to throw the ball into tight coverage continually. Because Kenny Galladay, not many people know this and nobody wants to admit it. Kenny Galladay is not a great separator. He's not. He's actually been bottom 5 in the NFL in terms of yards of separation at target in each of the last 2 years. What he is phenomenal at is going up and getting the ball in contested catch situations. So he doesn't create separation, but he wins one-on-one battles.
Does that worry you as an investor in Kenny Galladay as a team? Because as he ages, separation is going to be something that's harder for him to find. And we all know as the skills deteriorate, the other positives of Kenny Galladay could potentially regress. So is that what could be holding up that Kenny Galladay market a little bit?
Well, it's understanding your quarterback, what your quarterback's willing to do, what he's not willing to do. It's why N'Keal Harry never made sense for Tom Brady. Brady is a guy that doesn't throw in a tight coverage. He doesn't at all. He took a step forward with Mike Evans. It took him a moment to build that trust to throw it up in those one-on-one situations. N'Keal Harry, he's the guy that wins those contested catch situations, but he's not a route runner. Galladay's better than N'Keal Harry. I'm not comparing those two, but it's the idea of understanding what you have as a quarterback. It worries me more as a fantasy investor in Kenny Galladay, where if he goes to a new situation, let's say it's not Ryan Fitzpatrick. Let's say he goes to play with Daniel Jones in the New York Giants. They kick Sterling Shepard back in the slot. They have Darius Slayton there. All of a sudden, it's like, is Daniel Jones going to be willing to trust Kenny Galladay in those one-on-one situations? Because again, he's not a guy. I think last year he averaged, it was like 1.9 yards of separation at target, which is again, one of the lowest numbers in football. Marvin Jones was never a great separator either. But again, Matthew Stafford was willing to throw it up to those guys in one-on-one situations. So that's kind of what you're looking for with Galladay. And that's why I say Washington is the dream scenario for us with Ryan Fitzpatrick as the quarterback there. But does it limit his upside though? Because Terry McLaurin's a phenomenal wide receiver in his own right. So, but again,
hey, a couple of years ago,
Marshall and Decker.
I was going to say Marshall and Decker, and it's not impossible that you could have two wide receivers go on. I mean, just a couple of years ago with Winston, you had two guys. The
difference, though, is Washington, that team has a phenomenal defense. That team is only going to get better under Ron Rivera. They have a young defense, that front seven. They added William Jackson, the cornerback from Cincinnati. I love that signing. He's better than Ronald Darby, in my opinion. So they actually upgraded by losing Ronald Darby. That defense is good enough where I don't know how many pass attempts they're going to have, but Scott Turner is a guy that cuts it loose. I mean, you look at 2019 Carolina, you look at last year in Washington with the collection of quarterbacks that he had, he's throwing the ball 600 times a year. If we get 600 times a year, Kenny Galladay and Terry McLaurin are going to finish as top 24 wide receivers.
I like that. All right, let's talk about one person who did sign a premium free agent, Aaron Jones, and kind of recap that for a moment. Now, Aaron Jones clearly has been really good in terms of fantasy. He's been an RB1 the last 2 years. And I think we all, I know some people are always arguing about should it have been him or Jamal Williams. We've seen, Jamal Williams moving on. We'll get to him later on in the program here. But, it's very rare that you see a running back who probably could have signed for more money somewhere else because it's so tough to get that payday as a running back. And he actually probably ended up settling for less money, in my opinion. I'm sure this is a fact. I really do. I mean, it just seems like you get some rumblings out there that it might be the case also, but he could have gone somewhere else. He is staying in Green Bay. So what does this do for his value now? Does it sustain, or are you concerned now with Williams gone that you get a bigger portion of Dillon along with him now, and that kind of cuts in a little bit because it certainly hits Dillon's value, I would think, more than anything. But how do you see this running back situation in Green Bay from a fantasy concept now?
I'm not so worried about A.J. Dillon. Dillon's more of that thumper, that first, second down back. He's not a guy that's going to steal a whole lot of passing down work. And that's where Aaron Jones, I mean, I've
really steal the goal line work. That I think is the question.
I don't think so. Aaron Jones has been so good. Why are you going to replace that guy on the goal line? I think they're going to spell Aaron Jones. You don't spend, the money they did over $40 million in a running back to take him out of the game when it's the most important situation, especially when Aaron Rodgers trusts him. He's a better receiver out of the backfield too. He's a guy that can run routes. The only concern that I have with Aaron Jones is if they do add a wide receiver high in the draft or in free agency or whatever they do, because it can start to siphon some of those targets, which are valuable to a guy that, again, he's not getting 20 carries a game like some of these big name running backs. But Aaron Jones, I say it time and time again, and he reminds me of Alvin Kamara, a guy that doesn't need 20 touches per game to live up to that RB1 status. He's just so damn efficient. And, the last 2 years, he was the only running back over each of the last 2 years coming into 2020 that had popped off where it's running backs who have scored more than expected. Every carry on the field, every target on the field has a value. If it's on the 5-yard line, it's 10-yard, 50-yard line. They all have expected fantasy outcomes. I basically go up and I add them up for all running backs, all wide receivers, tight ends, and I figure who was better than they were supposed to be based on the touches they got. Aaron Jones was top 5 both 2018 and 2019. I just actually did the research for this.
Actually, I'm glad you brought this piece up because it's one of my favorite pieces that you've done. I paid close attention. I even turned it into a TV segment because I thought it was such a fascinating piece. So I did not take credit for it, though. I gave you full credit. I just want you to know. But it is a great piece of study there. And if you have some of the information now, you definitely share it with us for this next group.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. He's number 7. He was number 7 in 2020, so he was still very efficient. Alvin Kamara, obviously, oddly enough, was number 1 this year. So those two running backs, those are guys that you just rely on every year. That you don't want to overthink it. And I think people did that in 2020 drafts, as they overthought it. They said, Aaron Jones scored too many touchdowns. There's going to be regression. He's in a timeshare. He's going to get 17 touches per game. If Aaron Jones gets 17 touches per game, he's finishing as an RB1.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I got a question for you. If you take out that one monstrous Alvin Kamara game, where would he be in this?
Because that's a good question.
But because his season was so audio. I don't want to ding him too much for the certain moments where Taysom Hill, because one of the Taysom Hill moments happened to also be the Denver game where you knew they weren't going to be playing anybody. Basically, they were just kind of sleepwalking through that game. So everybody's, looks at that sample size with Taysom Hill. And one of those games is that game where Kendall Hinton was playing quarterback for Denver, which is a terrible thing to kind of lump in because it was completely not fair. It's not a good representation.
Right.
But at the same time, 12 touchdowns in one game isn't a great representation either. Where you went crazy. So I kind of wonder, at some point in time, you might have to give us that nugget.
I can tell you this. I actually have the number.
No.
So he scored 87.3 fantasy points more than the average running back would have, which again was number 1. Not that he crushed number 2. Number 2 is 54.5. So he was more than 33 points per game higher than the next guy in that statistic. Wow. So I'm guessing even if we remove that week 16 game, he would still finish number 1.
All right. He's not a premium free agent, but for the Jets, he could be a premium wide receiver. So let's talk a little Corey Davis. Corey Davis finally realized some of that big potential we've been waiting for years and years. And look, combination of injury, combination of quarterback play. We could say a lot of things about this, but for whatever reason, you could look back at 2020 and think certainly that you saw the best possible Corey Davis that you could have seen so far. And he was still in the presence of Derrick Henry being the number 1 guy in the offense. It was still within the presence of Ryan Tannehill running the ball and getting some touchdowns of his own. It was still in the presence of A.J. Brown, a fantastic young wide receiver. Yet Corey Davis was still able to put up some very solid numbers last year. Did the Jets just get themselves a wide receiver 1, in your opinion, or are they buying at the peak, which is a very dangerous thing to do with a player that's got now one very good season? I don't even want to say great. I want to say very good season attached to him and more of a label of potential than productivity.
I liked Corey Davis coming into the league. I'm not even going to run away from that. He suffered an injury the first training camp with the Titans, and it kept him off the field. I think he played like 11 games his first year. So he was basically behind the curve. Rookie wide receivers tend not to do a whole lot. So when he was hurt in the beginning, it was almost like he wasn't getting the reps in practice. I didn't expect that much. Okay. Then the next year, it's like he took a step forward, but it wasn't great. Then 2019 came. Marcus Mariota, starting quarterback still, and then you had Ryan Tannehill practicing with the backups. AJ Brown, if you guys remember when he was drafted, he was not a starter right away. It was Tajay Sharp, it was Adam Humphries, and it was
That's
Corey
right.
Davis. So Ryan Tannehill was working with the backups in practice, which was AJ Brown. So once Marcus Mariota, they realized that he's just not very good, they decided to go to Ryan Tannehill. And when that happened, you saw AJ Brown come into the starting lineup with him. And all of a sudden, you start seeing this chemistry between these two on the field, and Corey Davis isn't getting consistent targets. Corey Davis had never worked with Ryan Tannehill because he was working with the starters all off season. He was working with the starters all throughout practice throughout the year. As the year went on, he got a little bit better, and he actually outperformed AJ Brown in the playoffs last year, 2019. Fast forward to 2020, it's like, okay, now he has some experience with Ryan Tannehill. They had a full offseason to work, and then week 1, AJ Brown gets hurt. Corey Davis becomes the wide receiver I think everybody expected him to be. He was consistent. He was getting solid targets. They weren't through the roof. He wasn't a guy that was getting 12 targets a game or anything like that, but he was consistent, and he was performing the way that I think the Titans wanted him to. There's a reason the Titans didn't pick up his option, because they felt like he just never became the player that they wanted him to be. And I think if you were to rewind and say, Titans, hey, go knock on their door and say, if you knew Corey Davis was the player that he was in 2020, would you pick up that 5th-year option? The answer would have been yes, because they have nobody behind AJ Brown in the roster. So it's like all of a sudden, Corey Davis, it's his chance to cash in. Good for him, making the most of his situation. But is it, Ryan Tannehill, the fact that Ryan Tannehill is very good at football and he's been like one of the most efficient quarterbacks? I'm not even just talking last year, like looking at his numbers, like of all time, like what he's done the last 2 years is kind of ridiculous, where it's beyond the point of saying, okay, is this guy actually good? Like, is he sneaky good?
I think it's beyond the point of questioning it. I think he's actually good.
Yes.
I think actually if you watch, you could even see at times when he played with the Dolphins in that Adam Gase offense, you could see the frustration and you could see the talent kind of getting suffocated by the systems in place and by the play calling in place. And you would see year over year, and you probably remember this too, Mike, is I recall there was a very incremental progress you saw from Tannehill from year 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. And it was so small, but you would see it, and you would see it in the stats too. And you say, man, this guy's right on the precipice of breaking out. And then he got hurt.
Yep.
And then the injury happened. And then obviously the rest is history. And then he ends up on the Titans. But I'm with you on that. And it's funny because I see a narrative out there where a lot of people say, well, Trubisky could be the next Tannehill. Trubisky does not have the same sort of, I want to say, leadership qualities that I saw in Tannehill. He doesn't have that same kind of intangible thing that you look for in a quarterback. Now, I'm not saying Trubisky can't turn around his career somewhere. He absolutely can. Anything's possible. But if you watch Tannehill in those games and didn't just look at the stats, you saw all the makings of a guy who could go out there and really do it and be a playoff caliber quarterback. And now he's gotten that chance. And of course, when you surround any quarterback with a great running game, it makes them infinitely better because it makes all their reads easier and it keeps the defense honest. And there's so many other things there that have worked out right. And I'm very happy for him. But with Corey Davis, here's the other question I have for you. Tell me this. Let's pretend right now Sam Darnold is quarterback. What does this do for Sam Darnold?
We don't know. That's the question. So, I love that you brought up Adam Gase, the whole Ryan Tannehill connection, because Adam Gase was the coach of Sam Darnold. And now people want to write off Sam Darnold because of that. Right. Now, have there been flashes of Sam Darnold being a good quarterback? Yes and no. Like there's some definite bad stuff on film with him, but then there's some other things that you watch and you're like, wow, Dan Orlovsky, former NFL quarterback, he broke down some tape and talked about Sam Darnold and why he believes that Sam Darnold, that there's still a lot hidden in there. It's just bringing it out. Can they do that, with the new coaching staff there? We have no idea how this new coaching staff is going to work out. Just because they came from Kyle Shanahan does not mean they are Kyle Shanahan. How many times do we have to go through this? So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's all of a sudden it's going to be the Kyle Shanahan offense. It's not. Are they going to grab concepts from that? Sure. Am I worried that Denzel Mims kind of conflicts with Corey Davis in terms of the players that they are? Maybe a little bit. Do I love how they're building the receiver core? I don't know. Because again, I would rather have, the X and the Y receiver where you have different skill sets and that you kind of exploit mismatches, where I don't know if there's a big difference in those two. I like Corey Davis, but we have a lot of unknowns here. We have Sam Darnold, who we don't know if he's very good. We don't even know if he's going to be the quarterback. It seems unlikely that he will be, though, just because when you hear the Jets GM come out and say, we're taking calls on Sam Darnold, that basically tells me that they're looking at a quarterback at number 2. So I don't expect it to be Darnold. So it's going to be a rookie quarterback, whether it be Justin Fields, whether it be Zach Wilson, maybe even Trey Lance. Maybe he worked his way up to number 2. I don't know. But there's a lot of questions about Corey Davis. And that's why for me, he is the best receiver on that team. But Is he going to get the targets necessary? How's the quarterback play going to be? I'm willing to take him right now. If I were drafting today, I think I would take him as a low-end wide receiver 3, which is actually worse than he finished with the Titans this year,
Right.
despite playing behind A.J. Brown when he's on the field. But at the same time, I'm not expecting the quarterback play or the efficiency to be what it was in Tennessee.
So does it change your opinion of all? Let's say it's Wilson. Let's say it's Fields as the quarterback of the Jets next year. Does that change your feelings at all, or Corey Davis kind of still stays in that range because, well, you're dealing with a rookie quarterback?
It's kind of a lot of unknowns, right? And you have to
build that the same, right? It feels like it does. It feels like the needle can't move right now on Corey Davis.
It's really tough, yeah. I mean, unless they get Trevor Lawrence, then I'd say, yeah, let's bump it up. But that next tier, I think there's a reason there's a lot of people dissecting and saying it's Zach Wilson. No, it's Justin Fields. No, it's this. No, it's that. It's because it's a tier of quarterbacks, and you really don't know which one's going to be which. I think Justin Fields is the safest quarterback of the bunch. Does he have room to grow? Absolutely, he does. They all do. But I think that going to the next level, for a quarterback from Ohio State or from a quarterback from BYU or North Dakota State, there's a big jump in competition. So to ask, I don't think it's going to be Trey Lance, because Lance has some developing to do, and I think he's a guy that's ideally going to sit for a year. Whereas Zach Wilson and Justin Fields, wherever they're drafted, I'm expecting those guys to start right away. So I would say it's probably Fields or Wilson, and I'd feel safer with Fields personally.
All right, let's talk about some of the guys who are staying put here. Chris Godwin stays put here. He's been franchised by the Buccaneers. Not really surprising there, because Tom Brady made it very clear how he felt about Chris Godwin and how important he was to that run. And when Chris Godwin got healthy at the end of the season into the playoffs, it was a difference maker there. So assuming a healthy season for Chris Godwin, what's your fantasy expectation for him? Give me your fantasy expectation in terms of, give me yardage, give me touchdowns, give me receptions that you think is reasonable with Tom Brady, with potentially looks like a lot of people coming back into this offense too.
Well, I think part of it depends on Antonio Brown. Is Antonio Brown coming back? Because if Antonio Brown's coming back, I'm tempering expectations, because he's going to get targeted. Mike Evans is going to get targeted. And I was doing some research yesterday in regards to this. I don't even remember what I was researching it for, because I'm just doing random things now. But basically, if you're looking for 3 wide receivers on a team to be viable options, like Marvin Jones, that's what it was for. Marvin Jones going to the Jaguars, right? You have DJ Chark, you have Laviska Shenault, and now you have Marvin Jones. What's the likelihood that 3 wide receivers hit the century mark in targets? And it's very unlikely, Joe. Over the last 5 years, we have I think there's been 4 teams that have had 3 wide receivers with 100+ targets, which is make that it's like a 2.5% chance. So when you start looking at that, it's like Antonio Brown, his targets were coming back up as he got into game shape, and you've seen it happen, right? Mm-hmm. Even in the playoffs, it was like Antonio Brown was becoming that dude again. You have Mike Evans, who's a stud in his own right. And I think Mike Evans grew a lot last year, and he earned Tom Brady's trust, and you've seen it going as the year went on. You saw that trust build and build and build, and you started seeing more consistent targets down the field to Mike Evans. Godwin never really got in that groove with Brady. Godwin was hurt early in the year. He had the hand or wrist injury, whatever it was, and he missed a couple weeks, came back to the lineup, and it was just kind of like it felt like he was in and out. So he never really had those big games that you would expect with Brady. But if Antonio Brown comes back, Godwin is more like a low-end wide receiver 2 for me. Not someone that I'm going to be willing to draft as a top 15 guy. If Antonio Brown does not come back, let's say he signs with another team, because there were rumors out there that he was going to be signing with another team, then all of a sudden the targets are available because Tyler Johnson's going to come into the lineup, and he's just second.
And he was impressive. Tyler Johnson had some impressive moments.
Yeah, he was solid. You have Scotty Miller, but those guys are not Antonio Brown. They're not going to take those targets. Where all of a sudden Chris Godwin, if AB is gone, I'd be willing to take Godwin as a top 15 wide receiver.
Is that even considering the Mike Evans hamstring issues that seem to be chronic now?
I mean, I don't know if I want to say it's chronic. I have so tough a time like labeling someone like.
I know, but I mean, we got to call it what it is. It's something that it's not gone away. It's been a couple years now, or at least there's hamstring issues. So I mean, and he's not getting younger. So every year it's another year in that clock. And Mike Evans has had a phenomenal career, absolutely. But does that enter into your ranking or thought process on Godwin, even if Antonio Brown comes back?
I don't think so much, honestly. I also think part of us has to bake in I think we do have to bake in the fact that Tom Brady's going to decline at some point. I mean, I know
You know,
that
I've been hearing that since
I,
2008.
I,
feel like-
I kid you not, dude. I said it probably 3 years ago to say we have to start being prepared for Tom Brady to eventually fall off because it happens, right? But like this guy is he human? Is he not? Like
No,
I don't.
nope.
I mean, usually we see a quarterback hit 38 and it's like this dude's past his prime, and then all of a sudden we see Tom Brady develop some chemistry with these Bucs receivers, and he has one of the best years he's had in a long time at 43 years old, and you're like, what the hell is happening?
Well, he also outworks everybody else, and I think that is the one thing that is I think sometimes under discussed. You know, everyone wants to make the Tom Brady joke sometimes, but nobody outworks that guy, and everybody who plays with him tells you that. Like, he is a coach on the field, he is so knowledgeable, and I guess when you've played as long as Tom, you understand that there's things that you can do where your body's declining and you can't make the same kind of throw you used to make, but you can find the smarter ways to do things. And he's been the king of that. I mean, Peyton Manning was able to do that to a certain extent too, as he kind of aged in there, and Drew Brees to a certain extent also. But what Tom Brady's done is just, it isn't human. I mean, it's the only way to really talk about it. Speaking of other weapons going back there, Rob Gronkowski goes back there as well. So your thoughts on Gronk going back? Is this relevant in standard leagues and tight end, or are you somebody that thinks, well, that was fun, it was a fun ride, let's not try to go down and have a sequel?
Well, part of me feels like it was an insurance thing for OJ Howard. OJ Howard was actually playing ahead of Rob Gronkowski when the year started in 2020. He actually performed better, but then he tore his Achilles. That's not a little injury. That's a full year recovery, and it's no guarantee that he comes back the same player. I think it was more insurance to bring Gronk back for another year. He's still a little bit clunky. I know he played well in the Super Bowl, but he's a little clunky out there. It's what we saw in New England. Like, he's a guy that's aging, and when you're that big and move that well for a long time, you know, you're going to break down. But I think it was more insurance. I won't be drafting him because I feel like I know what he is at this point. And it's like, are you going to win a league because you drafted Rob Gronkowski in the 8th or 9th round? No. Are you going to lose it because of it? Probably not. But at the same time, there's other tight ends that you could find later on that are probably going to give you a little bit more upside. I'd rather take chances on guys like that because I think it's possible OJ Howard comes back and is actually the starting tight end that you want to own there in Tampa.
How important is that Barrett's back as well?
I mean, Barrett coming back is huge for their defense. I mean, that team needs the pressure up front because their secondary is relatively weak. Anytime I go and I do the mocks for Tampa Bay, I look at it and I'm like, what are the weaknesses in this team? You know, you could talk about adding maybe to the interior of the offensive line if you want to, but the offensive line played extremely well last year. I don't even want to take anything away from them. They drafted Tyler Johnson. They have a backup at wide receiver. Safety, their safeties are set. Cornerback's the biggest one. Cornerback is the biggest one for me. But as long as you have that pressure up front with Shaq Barrett, with Jason Pierre-Paul, they mask some of that deficiency in those cornerbacks, right? So that's basically, it's huge for their defense. But I still anticipate them adding a cornerback maybe at the tail end of that first round.
All right, last one to talk about who's staying put, Allen Robinson, who, you know, I think all of us were hoping that maybe he could get out and finally get with a quarterback of note. That's probably not going to happen here. It looks like it's going to be Andy Dalton, at least for now, as we're discussing it here live on Fantasy Pros. And I'll ask you this, you know, is it an upgrade? I mean, or do you think that now, you know, it's just the trendy thing where everybody's like, oh, Andy Dalton, because he's not Russell Wilson? Of course not. But Andy Dalton's a Pro Bowl quarterback. Andy Dalton has been to numerous playoff games. He hasn't won any, but he's been there. He understands that playoffs do exist. And I mean, when you're looking at this, are they being too harsh a little bit? I know we'll get into the quarterbacks in a second, but let's take a moment here to kind of focus on Allen Robinson and understand, okay, what's going on here now with Dalton and Robinson? Do you think it's kind of status quo here for Robinson, or is there perhaps even a small upgrade that maybe it's not fair that people are kind of not discussing?
I think it's crazy that some people want to think that Allen Robinson would have been better off outside of Chicago from a fantasy standpoint. And I say that because he's had 154 and 151 targets the last 2 seasons. Do you know how many wide receivers have had 150 targets in each? Or actually, there's been no one outside of Robinson who's had it in both the seasons. But even in general, if they had one season with 150 plus targets, there was a total of 6 wide receivers. Allen Robinson's one of them. Is it hyper efficient to have him get targets from Nick Foles and Mitch Trubisky? No, but when you get that many targets, it's rare in today's NFL. It's extremely rare because teams are going 3-4 wide all the time. three wide receivers basically base formation now, as far as I'm concerned, with what teams run. So to see a wide receiver get 150 targets, you should be like, this is great, because all we talk about when we talk about DFS, when we talk about redraft, anything, we talk about opportunity. You want opportunity. Running backs don't matter. You want opportunity. They matter, but at the same time, opportunity is the biggest thing we have to look for, and he's been getting it. Okay, Andy Dalton did support AJ Green as like a top 3 fantasy wide receiver for a long time. And Andy Dalton played much better once he got a grasp on Dallas's offense last year, came back from the concussion, from COVID and all that stuff. He started playing better, and he started spreading the ball around a little bit with Michael Gallup, with Amari Cooper. CeeDee Lamb wasn't nearly as good, but this really comes down to there's no other option with the Bears that can get those targets. There's not. It's not like you're looking at Allen Robinson and Robbie Anderson or something. Like you're looking at Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney. Okay, they're looking to trade away Anthony Miller. There's no one. Okay, so Chicago is always, from a fantasy standpoint, Chicago is always the best place for him. Now, if you want to talk about from Allen Robinson as a person, and you want the best quarterback for him, he's talked about winning. He wasn't going to sign with a team that wasn't going to go anywhere. He wanted to win. And, you start looking around the league and it's like, what do you want him to go to Baltimore to play with Lamar Jackson? I mean, Lamar Jackson became better as a passer, but he's not going to get 120 targets with Lamar Jackson. So It really just came down to the potential landing spots, the teams, the quarterbacks that he was going to go that need a wide receiver, like the Jets. Do you feel great about Corey Davis with his quarterback situation right now?
No, we already talked about that. He's Corey Davis. We've put in as a 3 is basically what we have, right?
So from a fantasy standpoint, I don't think fantasy analysts should be mad that Allen Robinson's in Chicago. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's a very healthy way of thinking about it, Mike. I like that. See, Tags is kind of, bringing everybody back down. And
I feel bad for him that he's in Chicago. I mean, but at the same time.
I feel bad for him, but at the same time, everything you just said makes me really excited to have him on my fantasy team, because you're bringing up fantastic points where, sometimes the best quarterback doesn't always make for the best fantasy return in sense of because of what the offense is. And Lamar is a quarterback who runs the ball so much. It might not be the best situation there where you're not going to have that kind of volume. Sure, you could be efficient. Yes, he could be great. I mean, I don't think we would be upset if he ended up with Patrick Mahomes, if Tyreek Hill wasn't there. If you put him with Deshaun Watson, I think we would have all gone, well, I think that's a pretty good landing spot.
No one wants to go to Houston. No one.
Well, here's, let's touch on this before we get to the rest of the quarterback, because I do want to talk about Dalton and Winston and those guys. Deshaun Watson's status right now, obviously with this new allegation coming out and a lot of things happening, we have to touch on it because, it does beg a certain amount of discussion point. And, I'm sure some people would come at it and say things like, well, this is odd timing. And other people saying, well, is this something that's coming out now so they can, go to the fan base and say, see, we're moving on from this guy. It's all good for everybody. It is peculiar that it's happening now, but at the same time, every allegation needs to be addressed. In your opinion, how much does this potentially make moving him harder or easier now in this whole landscape of what's going on in the NFL with Deshaun Watson?
I think it's going to be harder. And from what we're being told, the Texans haven't even been willing to talk to people about Deshaun Watson. Like, they're not even entertaining offers. Like, it's like, nope, we're not talking about it. We're not discussing it. And that's where it's at right now. It's tough. I mean, you would think that if they really had can we get any worse with Deshaun Watson? Say I'll never play for Houston again and doing all this stuff. Like, we can't get any worse. I know they're trying to sign a bunch of players right now, but it's terrible. Like, legitimately, they've had the worst free agency of anybody.
Well, I also don't understand their coaching hire too. I mean, Eric Bieniemy's out there, and I mean, I thought that would have gone a very long way for him, and not having him in the process. And I heard this, and I'd love to get your take on it also, because I feel like it bears discussion too, that you have Tom Brady go, I'm going to go here, and this is what I want. If you give me all of this, we can win. And then he goes there and he does. And I think Russell Wilson sees that. I think Deshaun Watson sees that. And he go, hey, why am I not involved in all the processes? If I'm the one who everything is built around and we're going to basically live and die with my success, then I don't want to steal the old Bill Parcells line, but if you're going to cook the dinner, shouldn't you be able to at least help shop for the groceries or figure out who's coming to dinner and who's at the party? Because it does. I mean, these are top quarterbacks. Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, these are the best of the best there. And the team still continuously kind of put them to the side in terms of figuring out the bigger picture stuff. That seems like a bad idea to me. And I understand Tom Brady's special, and I get that. And he has earned that right as the GOAT, that he could go out and do those things. But should the other NFL teams kind of also step up and make those guys like Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson more part of the GM process, the head coach trial, all the other processes, the acquisition of player processes. Because I know it's like a precedent, but at the same time, it seems like a smart precedent.
I have this conversation with some so I have friends that are not like heavy into football like I am, right? And I tell them about these
What
situations.
do you talk about, you two?
That's a good question. Cars a lot.
I've got my car friends and I got my football friends.
Pretty much. But no, I try to explain to them because they'll ask me about things they hear on Chicago Sports Talk Radio. And they're like, you know what, Deshaun Watson, isn't he like, shouldn't he just like worry about his job and just play? Like he's making a lot of money. I'm like, okay, there's a few people in the league that should be involved in your process. Your franchise quarterback is one of them, especially when they've earned the right. Deshaun Watson is a guy that's earned the right. He's earned the right to be in those meetings. He's earned a right to say, "Hey, this is what I really need as a quarterback to succeed. This is what I want." He
played in a playoff game, tags with a collapsed lung.
Oh no.
What more does this guy have to do to prove that he is a Texan? I don't understand.
No, I agree, but that's the same thing with Russell Wilson, though. Some of these decisions like annoy the crap out of me. Like Pete Carroll having such a big head that you can't say, I have one of the best quarterbacks of all time on my team in Russell Wilson, yet I want to run the football. That's our job. We want to run the football. Your defense sucks. Okay, if you didn't have Russell Wilson on your team, and if you grabbed another quarterback like an Andy Dalton, you would be a 1-win team. I truly believe that. I think Russell Wilson is that damn good that he's masked a lot of deficiencies on that Seattle football team, and to not involve him in some of the decisions, I think it's starting to boil up. Where it's like I think you hit it on the head, saying, Tom Brady goes to a team and it's like he's got say so, and they listen to what he wants and they bring it in, and they win a Super Bowl because of it.
In year one.
Yeah. Now you're not going to give that same freedom to someone like Mitch Trubisky or Andy Dalton. You're not going to do that because again, you guys have not proven yourselves that, you can play in this league at a high level continually and win championships. Now, Deshaun Watson hasn't won championships, but he's not the reason that they continually lose.
Well, Russell Wilson has.
Right.
Russell Wilson has won a championship and been to 2 Super Bowls. So why doesn't he get that? And you know what? I don't think he's wrong. I don't think either of them are wrong to want to be involved in the process, especially if what you heard is true, which is he was told, and Deshaun Watson was told he would be part of the process of the GM hiring, everything else, and then he wasn't. And then they just hired the GM and he had no idea, wasn't even involved.
It's nuts.
It's nuts. It's bad business. It's terrible business. And that's not how you run a franchise. And it's just, it's a very difficult situation there.
It's almost like, like everybody's seen Friday Night Lights. We've all seen these things. And there are certain things like where, yes, you're their boss and all that, but it's at the same time, they have to keep that person happy because he's the key to your success, right? You're not winning anything without a franchise quarterback. You're just not.
Right.
Like we've learned that in today's NFL, you have to have that. So you have to keep that guy happy. You have to have him want to stay with your franchise. I don't know. I mean, it's bananas. But Houston's not trading him. So I think that's why they signed Tyrod Taylor, because it was more like, hey, we're holding on to him. And if he holds out, we can still implement the same offense in a way with Tyrod Taylor as a semi-mobile quarterback, basically not have to drastically change the offense if Deshaun Watson decides to hold out.
It is such a difficult situation in dynasty leagues if you have a rostered Deshaun Watson. It is tough because you don't want to sell him low. He is a fantastic game-changing quarterback. You are stuck if he sits out the entire year. You're stuck in a bad spot. I mean, it's very frustrating, and I get it. He's frustrated, and I know all the fantasy people out there are frustrated too, and we'll see if somehow it works itself out, but I think it's going to get uglier before it gets better too. Like, I'm just putting that out there too. Like, I don't think we've begun to see the ugly there with all of that, so stay tuned for that. Let's talk about some more quarterbacks, and let's start here with Jameis Winston, who came back to the Saints on a 1-year, $12 million deal. Now, Winston, certainly, we have seen good and bad out of him, and you could say and certainly take the angle that Bruce Arians, a very aggressive offense, always wanted to throw the ball downfield. When you're that aggressive, you're going to make mistakes, especially a young quarterback. But there's still Winston's mistakes as well to a certain degree, and he has to own them. Now he's in a situation where Taysom Hill is there. What does Sean Payton do here? Is this going to be just the same kind of offense we've seen before, where Taysom Hill comes in and gets his work and does some things, maybe a little bit more than what you saw at a Breeze, because Winston and Breeze are not the same guy. One's going to the Hall of Fame. Or do you think that you're actually going to see a battle here at quarterback to a certain extent, or the hot hand, which is even worse?
Yeah, I mean, that's the worst case scenario.
It's the worst thing.
I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be one or the other when the season starts. Now, the downside to Jameis is that even if he wins that starting quarterback job, we've seen Drew Brees lose snaps to Taysom Hill. It's going to happen, which will remove some of the fantasy upside, especially once they get down in the red zone. As for the competition, I think they want Taysom Hill to win the job, but Jameis is kind of like their backup plan. Now, Taysom Hill, he's been willing to do things for the team. He's been willing to be used in a million different ways. He's like the Swiss Army knife that they could do whatever they want with. I was really shocked that they went from Breeze getting hurt to Taysom Hill rather than Jameis Winston last year, because I felt like it was a less drastic change to change your offensive philosophy, your game plans, and all that to go to Jameis Winston. But what we have to watch here is the value on someone like Alvin Kamara. Okay, Kamara is going to lose value losing Breeze regardless, because Breeze was a guy that was willing to check down a lot. Like he basically hits the back of his drop and he decides if he's going to let the ball go or if he's going to dump it down. A lot of the quarterbacks don't do that. They continue to scan the field or whatever. Jameis Winston's one of those guys that just doesn't dump it down a whole lot. He's willing to take shots down the field. He's willing to give his wide receivers those one-on-one opportunities. Whereas Taysom Hill, you're not going to see as many passing attempts. You're not going to see as many pass attempts to the running back position. We already saw Alvin Kamara. I think in the 4 weeks that Taysom Hill was the starter, Alvin Kamara was the number 15 running back in fantasy football, which does include that one game against Philadelphia where he had like 9 targets or whatever. So there's a lot to go off here, a lot to dissect, but honestly, the value of Alvin Kamara, the value of Michael Thomas, the value of even Traquan Smith, or all these, the pass catchers, basically, all these guys, that's what we have to watch this for. I think both are going to have value, whether it's Taysom Hill as a starter. If Taysom Hill is a starter, he's going to be a top 12 fantasy quarterback while he's starting. Can he lose a job rather quickly? Maybe. I mean, they signed Jameis Winston for a reason. He's getting borderline. He's like getting paid in between starter money and backup money.
Well, that's why I asked if the hot hand thing or the game plan quarterback, because that is a terrifying thing for fantasy owners. It's something now, if you're playing DFS, it's very different, because that's great, because then you get that value on that given week, depending on what you think it might be. And if you're going, well, this is going to be a heavy Taysom Hill game because, this defense struggles with XYZ. And well, this is going to be, they have weak corners and things. Maybe going to air it out a little bit more with Winston this week. That is going to be fascinating, kind of enters into it. And from a super flex standpoint too, that is really difficult. It almost kind of, I don't know if it just takes them both out of the equation or if you want to handcuff these two guys. Like, I don't even know which way I want to go yet. And I think I probably just want to stay away.
Yeah, I mean, you it's almost a must to draft 3 quarterbacks at that point if you draft either of them. The best thing would probably be to handcuff them. I think you're right there, depending on, hopefully by the time your draft rolls around, we have some sort of idea as to which quarterback is supposed to be starting for them. And then that'll create a higher ADP and one will drop. But if they're both sitting around ADP 18 to 20, it's going to be difficult to handcuff those guys because that's still starting quarterback range. But basically, if you want to draft one of them, you're going to have to draft 3 quarterbacks, like no ifs, ands, or buts about it, because you really can screw your season in a super flex if you're forced to go to the waiver wire to grab a quarterback.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's a backup quarterback because the starter got hurt, which means they're probably not going to have a whole lot of value. It's a mess. So honestly, this is pretty ugly. The Bears were in on Jameis Winston too. They were a team that was reportedly in the bidding, but the Bears were holding out for the Seahawks to come through with Russell Wilson. So they had half foot in, half foot out. And that's why they ended up signing Andy Dalton, because Seattle ultimately said, hey, we can't do a trade right now. And the Bears couldn't sit there and just wait for him to be scooped up along with Winston, along with Fitzpatrick. And all of a sudden it's like, well, we've already kind of burned those bridges with Mitch Trubisky. So
yeah, that's definitely true. All right, I know this is difficult to answer, but based on this conversation now that we're talking about this potential quarterback fluctuation, what does this do to Michael Thomas's value? Because that, I think, definitely is, I mean, we could talk about Kamara's value all we want. At the end of the day, he's still, I think in most people's eyes, a risk they're willing to take. But what does this do to Michael Thomas now with potential quarterback fluctuation in New Orleans?
If it's Taysom, Michael Thomas is more of like a high-end wide receiver too. That's where I'd put him in my rankings, because again, this team, I don't anticipate them throwing the ball more than 30, 32 times a game. If it's Jameis, I'm going to put him back inside probably my top 8 wide receivers, because Jameis, he's a guy that's willing to let it up to his receivers. He has to find that reliable target. Michael Thomas is that reliable target, the guy that catches anything close to his body. It's going to be an adjustment for Michael Thomas, though, because he goes from a guy like Drew Brees that's just so reliable that the ball's always on target to someone like Jameis, who's going to require him to do acrobats to basically come down with the ball. But if you're a Michael Thomas supporter, if you're a Michael Thomas dynasty owner or whatever, you want Jameis Winston to win this job.
All right, let's move on to Andy Dalton. Now, he's back with Laser, who he actually had some success with earlier in his career. So does that also kind of make you – I know this is tough for you? I know this is a loaded question because, it's the fandom and we all have it. I mean, anybody who, doesn't still love their team and doesn't really love football. But at the same time, yet when we separate this as analysts, and you're really looking at this from the higher level now. I mean, he's coming into a situation where Mooney looked very good at times last year. Allen Robinson, we already sung his praises earlier in the show. Montgomery coming off his first really solid season. And I know there's some warts with some of those stats that you pointed out before with Montgomery that maybe it wasn't quite as good as we should expect going into next year. But Andy Dalton is going into a situation where he did play better towards the end of the year with the Cowboys. Again, the standard was very low. The bar was set very low. Is he also somebody that, again, came in June, right, to the Cowboys? I mean, he was a late signing. I feel like Andy Dalton was very late in the game where it was post-draft. They let him go, and he ended up going over there, and there wasn't time to prepare. Obviously, he probably never thought he would play with Dak Prescott being there. So if he gets a regular offseason and he gets regular camp and all these things go as possible, can Andy Dalton be someone that the Bears can be competitive with offensively? And is it an upgrade over last year?
Is it an upgrade? Maybe. You know what's weird about this whole Bears signing with Andy Dalton? It's something I wanted to talk about. I am a fan of the Bears, but I'm also, Yates has called me like the worst. He said that I'm like the biggest pessimist when it comes to the Bears. And I think that it's just, I separate my job and fandom. Like in terms of fan, like I'm a fan, I'll watch and I root for the Bears against teams.
But you have reason to be pessimistic. The Bears have never had a quarterback throw for 4,000 yards in a season.
No, it's kind of ridiculous at this point.
That is absurd at this point in football. We have gotten to a point in the NFL where passing is what it is. And the Bears still have never had a quarterback throw for 4,000 yards.
Right. No, it's crazy. The storied franchise that doesn't have a franchise quarterback. But I last year, if you went back to last year this time and said that the Bears were signing Andy Dalton, I wouldn't have been mad about it. I feel like Andy Dalton's a fine player. I feel like he can manage a football game. He's not going to carry you to championship, but the defense was good enough to do that. But after watching the Bears in 2020 and after watching another year of Matt Nagy, I'm losing confidence in their coaching staff's ability to get the most out of their players is basically what it comes down to. When Matt Nagy was hired by the Bears, he had a press conference. And he talked about, they said, what are your expectations for this team? He said, well, it's really way too early. I have to basically take a look at the roster, find the strengths and the weaknesses and build my system around those players' strengths and weaknesses. And somewhere along the line, he lost it. I think his rookie year, he was doing some things and then he got to the point where it was almost too confident. And then he basically just goes forward and it's so predictable in terms of what they do every single week that I've lost confidence in the coaching staff. And you talked about Bill Lazor. It's Nagy calling plays. That's what it comes down to. And,
right.
The time is over for me to have optimism with Matt Nagy calling plays. He needs to give up the play calling abilities.
What happened there?
I don't know.
Because we were so high. I mean, I don't think I'm alone here. I feel like we were all kind of high on him when he kind of took over. We saw what was going on with Alex Smith in Kansas City, and we're all looking at this, and this is a really good offense. They're doing good things. The beginning of the Trubisky run there with him seemed like it had potential.
Yep.
Why did the wheels come off? What happened?
Well, that's part of it is that, the first year, everything was good. He won coach of the year, Ryan Pace, GM of the year. And it's like, oh, everything's going great with the Bears. And then the next year, it's like you started to see some of the leaks where it's like nothing changed. And it's like we're bringing in Cordarrelle Patterson and they're forcing to fit players into a thing. They're forcing it now where instead of like finding a player's strengths and weaknesses like Trubisky, they had him rolling out in first year. They had him rolling out. Like that's something that he does extremely well, throwing to his right in particular on the run. And it's almost like they tried to make him a stationary quarterback. And then they signed Nick Foles. And it's like, you guys are going backwards and you're regressing your franchise. Like you're just turning things backwards. Where are you going with this? And then it's like the offense didn't even change from when they went to Foles to Trubisky. And towards the end of the year, you heard Nagy give up some of the play calling duties. And then you started to see Trubisky play a little bit better because they gave him some more freedom. But in the same time, Nagy ended up pulling it back. And it's like, oh, I'm going to call the plays again.
Right.
This is the reason that I think Eric Bieniemy has not been hired. And I know it's pretty crappy because I don't think that he should be pigeonholed into, well, just because you were a coach under Andy Reid. There was a time where coaches under Andy Reid everybody wanted him because it was like, and Andy Reid himself talked about Matt Nagy and saying that he was his best prodigy and he's the most NFL ready coach and this and that. And he talked him up so much. And now all of a sudden people are looking at Matt Nagy and it's like, well, wait a minute, who's the genius in Kansas City? It all stems from Andy Reid.
It does, but I mean, the Andy Reid tree has been better than some others in recent memory. I mean, that's That's also something. As we lost Mike there for a second, we'll get him back in a moment. There's also some news floating around that there might be a Kenny Golladay signing soon. When we have that confirmed, we'll discuss it. But we don't do rumors and innuendo here. We're just trying to make sure we get
I think I'm back.
that all confirmed. We are back now. So the rest of your thoughts here about the Andy Reid coaching tree maybe not being as good as it was. That's okay. I fill the time as I always do. You can't throw anything at me. I've been through the crazy things. I was once on Sirius XM for an hour and 10 minutes talking to John Lobb about the draft because there was a fire drill and all the producers were outside of the building. And they said, well, just stay on air. Just stay on air. And thank God I had John Lobb, one of the great people you'll ever talk to, one of the nicest guys, and you could just wind him up and he would go.
I'm not even sure. Yeah, I'm not even sure what happened there, but Andy Reid basically comes back to everything stems from Andy Reid, and the guy's just a phenomenal coach. And the Super Bowl was not great from a game planning standpoint. There was no adjustments and stuff like that. But in the end, it's like you look at all the coaches and you look at the players that come from there, and it's like, where'd this success come from? And again, so as for Andy Dalton, I would have been happy with the signing last year, but unfortunately, I've lost confidence in the coaching staff. And when that happens, I don't even know if it matters what quarterback they brought in. If it was Russell Wilson, he's good enough to overcome a lot. And that's why I wanted Russell Wilson so bad. Deshaun Watson too. I mean, you look at the coaches he's played for, the wide receivers that the offensive lines that he's had. And, but Andy Dalton's not good enough to overcome that.
All right, let's move on to Ryan Fitzpatrick here and close off the quarterback conversation before we move on to some defense and some other items here on our agenda at Fantasy Pros. You're watching, obviously, the free agent special here as Tags and I are breaking things down for you. I want to remind everybody to go out to Fantasy Pros. Make sure you're following us. The fantasy news app that we have at Fantasy Pros, you can get out in the Android or Apple store. And news people do a great job here at Fantasy Pros, keeping you up to date with all the latest and the fantasy takeaways from all of these signings. So much going on here. We're going to get some of the depth signings too this hour as we talk, because those are going to be important and they're going to matter quite a bit in the war of attrition that is the NFL season. But make sure you follow us at Fantasy Pros on Twitter and at Instagram as well while you're doing that. And Tags, let's talk about Ryan Fitzpatrick, who is certainly one of my favorite characters in the NFL. I mean, I'm a Fitzmagic guy. I just am. He makes me smile. He's fun to watch. And it was a very difficult pill for him, and I think everybody to swallow last year when you saw that changeover in Miami happen at the time where it happened. It just seemed like everything's going so well. Why are we screwing with a winner? But there's always pressure from the organization that this is the franchise quarterback, and if he's ready to play, it's time to start turning the page. But alas, the page has been turned. Now he's in Washington. So we kind of touched on it a little bit in hour one, but just to reiterate for those who missed, great defense. You got McLaurin. Antonio Gibson looks like a player. So what are your thoughts with Fitzpatrick now with this current crop of weapons that he's got in Washington?
I'm happy for Fitzpatrick. I think everybody's a fan of that guy. I mean, he just seems like a guy that you could just sit down, have a beer with, have a good time. He went to Harvard. Did you know that?
That is my favorite thing. Every single game he's on, they got to talk about the fact he went to Harvard. Hey, did you guys know that? No, I didn't. He's only been in the league for 20 years. And I think they also said that there's only one more division he hasn't played in yet. Right?
Yeah, there's only one team that he has not played or thrown a touchdown against. I think it's Green Bay.
Right, but there's also one division now that he hasn't played in.
Wow.
He's played in, which is just staggering when you think about it.
You want to know what's crazy, though? Did you know that Ryan Fitzpatrick has yet to play in a playoff game?
Yes, he's yet to play in a playoff game despite all of that. I feel like it's becoming like Chuck Norris now. Did you know that Andy Dalton once did this? I feel like that's where we're going with this. No, but it's amazing, and he's bounced around, and they do the funny wheel with the Fitzpatrick is no good, and then he's a backup, and then he takes over for the starter. He's really good, and then becomes a starter again, and he's bad. But you know what? I feel like that's not 100% fair. And I think some of the circumstances he's been in has been very difficult. And yes, he is a journeyman, but at the same time, Tags, this is an opportunity for him once again to be the starter. Everybody expects him to be the starter. And it's got to have at least a small bounce, I think, for the offense as a whole, because the quarterback play last year was, talk about smoke and mirrors. I mean, it was just awful some weeks. So it's got to be at least a big upgrade there. And maybe, is there any love for some of the secondary receivers now?
Yeah, we haven't seen all the moves yet. I think Golladay is potentially going there. Juju Smith-Schuster is a guy that would fit in there, play the big slot role. These are things that we have to watch as time goes on. They could draft a wide receiver. I love the move for the pass catchers. Now, Logan Thomas is someone that I'm interested in finding out what happens here, because Fitzpatrick over the course of his career hasn't been a big tight end guy. He hasn't traditionally targeted his tight ends a whole lot. He actually targets his perimeter wide receivers an awful lot. So I'll be interested to see how that works out, because Logan Thomas kind of broke out towards the latter portion. It's like, as the year went on, Logan Thomas got better and better. And even Ron Rivera said there was like a aha moment for Logan Thomas. And then from that point forward, Logan Thomas was a superstar in fantasy football. So I'm curious to see the relationship between those guys. But Fitzpatrick, this is a weird marriage between these two, because like you have a team that has a really, really good defense, a team that you would think might want a game manager quarterback under center. Fitzpatrick ain't that.
No, he's not.
He's really not. But truth be told, you already said it, is that it's been really unfair to Ryan Fitzpatrick. You go back to Tampa Bay. He deserved that job over Jameis Winston, but they gave it to Jameis Winston because they had to find out if he was their franchise quarterback, because nobody wants to view Ryan Fitzpatrick as that guy. And then you fast forward and you go to Miami, played extremely well for Miami this year, had this team on a play. They should have made the playoffs, but then all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, they pull it out the rug and they say, hey, Tua's he's the guy now. And it's like, well, what the hell, man? I've been playing pretty well. We've been playing well. Like he gets like everybody around him. You can tell everybody's having fun playing football. Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Absolutely.
And that's part of it, right? A playoff team. Like if you go back, like I know it's baseball, but like the 2005 White Sox, they were a team that...
Wait a minute. Is Tags going to make a baseball reference here?
I am making a baseball reference.
I might have to quit the show. I might have to just walk off the set right now. Tags is making a baseball reference. Go ahead. I'm all ears for this.
Hold on. But no. In reality, that team was not the most talented team that you'll ever see. No. But they had the best postseason record ever. And it was like, why did that happen? Because the team had fun. It was just a fun team. It was built really well. And I would love to see Ryan Fitzpatrick be that guy. Again, Scott Turner, you go back to his last year in Carolina and you look at his first year, he's played with, like, think about the quarterbacks he's had, like Cam Newton for a couple of games. Then it was Kyle Allen. Then it was Will Greer. Then it was Dwayne Haskins, Alex Smith after his injury, Kyle Allen again, Taylor Heineke. And all of a sudden it's like, wait, this guy's throwing the ball 600 times a year with those guys? And it's like, all of a sudden you have Ryan Fitzpatrick, who, by the way, there have been 2 times in his career where he's thrown the ball more than like 550 times. He finished as a top 12 fantasy quarterback both times. So I do happen to think that Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to be a fantasy relevant quarterback this year in terms of like, maybe not every week starter.
Well, what about a super flex? Let's talk about him. Like he seems like a solid,
perfect,
fantastic QB2 that you feel really good about. There's going to have some QB1 weeks in him, but you can tolerate the other ones.
Provided they don't draft a quarterback and then he gets Wally pipped again, where all of a sudden it's like he's got Mac Jones breathing down his neck. And then they go to Mac Jones and you're like, why the hell would you do that? But hopefully they don't add a big name quarterback behind him or a rookie where it could, he could, but as of right now, Ryan Fitzpatrick is the ideal number 2 quarterback in a super flex league. 100%.
All right. We also got a little bit of quarterback news. Ian Rappaport from NFL Network is reporting that the Jaguars are receiving offers on Gardner Minshew, which is not surprising. I think that's a quarterback in terms of backups. I feel like he's a really good backup, right? Like Gardner Minshew's a guy, if you could call on him, he could be really good for, he could be really good for a game or two. I think he makes a lot of sense for a team that needs a backup that's a competitive team. And I think as a starter in the NFL, that's a tough sell for me from what I've seen so far. But, and again, the Jaguars have their warts. Let's talk a little defense here, switch gears. Bud Dupreeh leaves the Steelers for the Titans. Dupreeh, fantastic last year. Then he had the injury. Your thoughts on this signing?
I think it's weird. I think it's weird. And I'm being serious. Because
they were looking for edge rush. So we're hoping they address that in the draft. That's the expectation, because where they are when we did the mock last week, and if you missed that, you can go back and listen to that show. We did our second mock. That there seemed to be a real grouping of edge rushers there. They're going to be available.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bud Dupreeh he's I think 28 years old. I think so. He's like, on the prime of his career, maybe on the wrong side of that, but whatever. Like he's basically in the prime. It's not, you don't sign him for a rebuilding franchise. So what it tells me is like, okay, the Titans, do you guys think you're winning now, or is this like I don't understand what you're doing to build the roster right now? Because then all of a sudden it's like Corey Davis is gone, Jonnu Smith is gone. These are guys you build your franchise around, because Corey Davis is just coming into his prime. Jonnu Smith hadn't even hit his prime. You guys drafted this man. You have no pass catchers. And then it's like you look at the secondary. They cut Adoree Jackson. They cut Malcolm Butler. Kenny Vaccaro's gone. And it's like, what are you guys doing? You guys blew your first round pick last year in Isaiah Wilson. I hated the pick when it happened. I hate it now. Obviously, now he's with Miami. But it sucks too, Joe, because I'm moving to Tennessee in less than a month now.
Maybe it's you. Maybe wherever you go, the football
I was about to say,
bad.
But that's the thing. I was telling my friends, I was like, if the Bears sign Russell Wilson when I leave here, I'm going to be pissed. And then it's like, all of a sudden, if that happens and I move to Tennessee and it's like they start getting rid of all their players, I feel like the place I live is just not is destined to suck at football. I don't know.
You're going to have to go to Nebraska or somewhere, no professional football there. That's where you have to end up. But yeah, let's continue on with some of the defensive signings. Yannick Ngakoue leaves the Ravens for the Raiders. He's trying to chase Fitzpatrick for how many teams he can play with. 2 years, $26 million for Ngakoue. Your thoughts on this signing for the Raiders?
I got into an argument with someone actually
over Yannick Ngakoue.
Yeah, and I kid you not. This is the stuff that I do in my off time. I talk to my friends about Yannick Ngakoue. I basically said that I didn't think he was someone that was a prized free agent, and I said that because all of a sudden you're seeing a lot of teams move on from this guy, and it's like there's something there because if a player helps you win, he helps you win. Bottom line, and as an NFL franchise, that's what you want. And now, leaving the Ravens, a team that like legit is in dire need of edge rushers, it's like them letting him go, and it didn't even seem like they offered him a contract. It's like, what's going on here? There's something here, and it might be a stats thing where it's like, I know he has phenomenal stats over the course of his career, but is he selfish? Is he not holding down his zones that he needs to be against the run? I looked at all that stuff. So, I mean, I don't know what the Raiders are doing either. This is another one of those teams where it's like, I feel like they're shaking things up for a reason, but letting go of like their entire offensive line doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Like they traded away Trent Brown, they cut Richie Incognito, they were going to cut Rodney Hudson, but now they traded him. That news came out. He went to Arizona right before we started this. Gabe Jackson, he's someone that's going to get cut and or traded. So it's like all of a sudden you're trading or losing 4 of 5 starters in the offensive line. Offensive line continuity matters. Like we've had offensive linemen on the Fantasy Pros Football podcast, like former NFL players that have talked about it. And they say, like, he was like, Tags, that's a great point because I think it's an underrated thing. Continuity, understanding the guy next to you, knowing what he's going to do in certain situations. There's something to be said for that. So rebuilding your entire offensive line, letting go of LaMarcus Joyner, like, I don't know what they're doing in LA or in Las Vegas.
Las Vegas now, yeah. It is weird. It's strange because it seemed like when Mayock came in there not too long ago, they seemed to have a real plan. And now I don't know what the plan is. And you make
now that they're not winning, they have to change that plan.
The lack of continuity on offensive line is crucial.
It's crazy.
People especially as fantasy people, sometimes I feel like we get so much into the skill set players that, football is won and lost on the line on both sides of the ball most of the time. And if you have good line play, chances are you're going to be a good football team. And everything kind of stems from that in both sides, because if you have good line play in the defense, it makes the cornerback play better, it makes the secondary better because they have, they don't have to go that extra 2 or 3 steps with the wide receiver. It's all a trickle down effect. And I don't understand, why that isn't analyzed more. I know we're going to talk about it a lot this year, I'm sure, but I feel like that's something that really needs to be driven home a lot more, is understanding the grades of the offensive line, understanding how that affects offenses, and likewise on the defensive side too. And as we keep talking about the defensive players here, Shaquille Griffin is going to be leaving the Seahawks for the Jaguars, 3 years, $44.5 million, 29 of that is guaranteed now. What do you make of this from the Seahawks standpoint too? Because this is a defense that had all kinds of issues. I mean, they were historically bad in the first half and then kind of found themselves and righted the ship a little bit. Jamal Adams being healthy certainly helped. But Mike, what do you make of this loss here from the Seahawks side and the gain from the Jags?
I don't know what the Seahawks are doing. Like there's teams that say we want good cornerbacks. Like they have really good safeties.
Well, I do think they couldn't afford him at the end of the day.
Well, I mean, that's just poorly run franchise then, because you need to make this work, because like they have 2 strong safeties. They traded away 1st-round picks to get Jamal Adams. Like they have strong safety play, but what good does that do when you're not getting any pass rush, when you have no cornerbacks? Like it doesn't matter. Like they're just the back end. They're just to make sure that you don't have someone go over the top of you. I don't know what they're doing. Quentin Dunbar was a signing they had last year that didn't pan out. Now Shaquille Griffin gone. I've been waiting to hear them sign somebody to fill that void, because I don't know if there's anybody on their roster right now that's starter worthy. That like would be a starter on all 32 teams. I just don't see it. I was looking through it. Ugo Amadi, he played pretty well in the slot last year, but that's a slot corner. You could find all those guys all over the place. Like Trey Flowers, are you excited about that? I don't know. It's just a bad defense. And ever since they lost like the Legion of Boom, you see that defense slowly taking a turn back. And it's like, they don't even want to use Russell Wilson. The Seattle Seahawks are in a bad way right now. For the Jags, I think the signing is cool, because Shaquille Griffin, he was a guy that he would have lapses in coverage at times. Like it was very zone heavy with the Seahawks. But now he won't be asked to be the guy. You know, they drafted CJ Henderson in the top 10 last year to be that guy. And now it's like Shaquille Griffin, you're not shadowing anybody. Like, you're the number 2 cornerback. That's perfectly fine. The Jaguars, they've made some moves in free agency, some that I don't agree with, but some that have allowed them, again, going into the draft, they're going to have some flexibility because they've snagged some guys to fill up some needs in free agency. So, I think it's a good signing by them. I think they paid him a little bit too much money, but again, when you have as much money as the Jags did, you have to spend it somewhere.
Yeah, I think the Jags, and we'll talk about this a little later on too, they did a good job of bringing in some professional football players, and we'll talk about that more on the offensive side too, which is good. I think that's a thing that's kind of needed there right now, as you kind of bringing in the young quarterback and more edge rushers too. We had defensive end Trey Hendrickson leaving the Saints for the Bengals for 4 years, $60 million, and Carl Lawson leaving the Bengals for the Jets. So a little bit of moving parts there. Any breakdown here on Hendrickson and Lawson in their new homes?
Hendrickson, what I saw, it's a 4-year, $60 million deal, but based on what I heard, and like I don't know if the exact details have come out, but basically only 2021 is the money that's guaranteed to his contract. So they could say you were a flash in the pan. We could let you go after a year. So good signing by the Bengals. They need to strengthen up that defense. Carl Lawson, phenomenal signing by the Jets. You know, I figured with Robert Salah coming in there, Saleh, I don't even know how you want to pronounce it.
Saleh. It's actually Robert Saleh.
I tried finding ways to pronounce it, and it was like there were different ones. I didn't even know which way to go.
You know how I remember it? Because it's like Holla.
Holla.
Holla. That's how
Robert Holla. We didn't know, you know, like he didn't have that edge rusher that he wanted. They're transitioning to a 4-3 defense from a 3-4. So you knew it would take some time. And it's like, are they going to draft guys to fill these voids? What are they going to do? And all of a sudden they lose Henry Anderson, but then they bring in Carl Lawson. That takes care of a big void. It's not to say that they can't still add edge rushers there, but I think this is a phenomenal step in that defense kind of turning things around because, again, it all starts up front. So having Carl Lawson and Quinnen Williams up there, that's a solid base to work with.
I think the Jets, one of the moves of the offseason is hiring that guy. I think he is just ready to be a great coach in the NFL. Whenever you listen to him talk, he just seems like the kind of guy you want to run through a wall for, and he has that intangible leadership quality, and you see it. And I think as impressive as he was 2 years ago on the work they did when they got to the Super Bowl, I thought this year was even more impressive with all the injuries they had, and you saw how they still competed. And I thought that was incredible. And you heard the way his defensive players talk about him. And I think that is what tells you everything you need to know about hiring a coach. When the players tell you, yeah, I mean, we were always prepared no matter what, didn't matter. When this guy went down, we were going to find a way to do that. And that is what you want in a head coach. And I think it's great that he's getting that opportunity. This is a phenomenal coaching hire, I thought, by the Jets this offseason. I think the best of all of them. So Jet fans, hopefully, fingers crossed for you. You figure out the quarterback.
Dan Harris.
You got the coach, Dan Harris. Maybe sunnier times are coming for Dan. Let's hope. He's also a Mets fan. That's a bad combination. Mets and Jets is tough. That is a tough combination to live with over the years. Believe me, I know. I'm a Mets fan. All right, let's move on here. Carlos Hyde, and talk about him moving to the Jaguars on the Philip Dorsett. So, like I said, the Jaguars bringing in guys. They brought in Marvin Jones too. So in terms of depth, I mean, you're bringing in some real professional football players here, and Carlos Hyde's been around. I get that. But what did you think about these signings? Because it feels like the Jaguars, I think, did a good job with what they're trying to do, which is just kind of beef up the roster a little bit. And I don't think that's a bad idea necessarily.
I think this is good news for James Robinson. I think it makes it less likely that they draft a running back with any sort of equity. And not to say that they should have. I never thought that they should have, but we always knew that there was going to be some sort of complement. They talked about adding another piece because they want to share that workload a little bit. Carlos Hyde's fine. Carlos Hyde is not the guy that's going to come in. You're going to be like, oh, he totally passed James Robinson. That's not going to happen. Carlos Hyde's the type of guy that if he gets 8 to 10 touches a week, that's not the worst thing for James Robinson. It'll keep him fresh. And we actually saw James Robinson towards the end of the year just kind of wear down. This offense overall should present some more efficiency, more scoring opportunities. So again, that should be a plus in James Robinson's side. But again, this signing, it actually does wonders for James Robinson because, again, it just makes it less likely that they grab a running back in the draft in day 1 or day 2. I just don't think that happens anymore.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Tags. I think that's exactly what it is, which is great because Robinson was a great story, and I'm a sucker for a good story, but he played really well, and it was very consistent. Are you worried at all about Robinson and the fact that he kind of wore down as the season went on, as most running backs do? I mean, let's be honest, it's not odd, but do you think that this is a one-year wonder scenario, or did you see enough with your eyes and with the stats to believe that he's worthy of a fantasy investment?
I mean, opportunity is everything. And, the offense will get better this year with Trevor Lawrence. The question is how much better? The question is how much opportunity, because we always knew it was going to regress. There was no way that James Robinson was going to get all the touches he got last year. Like every week I looked at it and I was astonished because it was like 92% of the touches, 94%. I'm like, they don't give this guy a break. They don't. They just don't take him off the field. And it was kind of remarkable because you just don't see that in today's NFL anymore. So once I had people all off season asking me, what are you doing with James Robinson in Dynasty? Are you keeping him? Are you selling him? What are you doing? Are you buying him? And I said, I would probably sell. I'd try and cash in on the high point of his value because, this year he was viewed as an RB1 all season long. So I was like, if you can get anything close to that value, I'd do it because there's a whole lot of uncertainty coming. This is a team that's going to become more of a pass first team under Trevor Lawrence because, well, you don't hide Trevor Lawrence. And on top of that, they were always going to add a running back. The question was, who was it? And then there's a new coaching staff coming in. So those are all things that can dramatically change a player's value. And what I'm saying is that this team is not all of a sudden going to become more run heavy or give James Robinson more, volume. There was no way that it could happen. So it was like the value for him can only go down as far as I was concerned. Again, Carlos Hyde is the best case scenario because he's not someone that's going to steal a whole lot of work from him. So I definitely like this for James Robinson. I think it's a good move for the team. They also signed Marvin Jones.
Mm-hmm.
The Jaguars did. Is kind of a veteran presence. They had Darrell Bevel coming over there from Detroit.
Right.
I don't know if the offense was necessarily the problem there. I think Matt Patricia and the defense was the problem.
You think?
So Marvin Jones at least knows the offense, right? It's a veteran presence to teach some of these young guys like Laviska Shenault and DJ Chark. The question is, how do they rotate these guys? Who's playing where? I think Shenault, as of right now, we should expect Laviska to play in the slot. He has versatility to play everywhere. I think DJ Chark could play more in the slot than they've played him there before. But Marvin Jones is almost purely a perimeter wide receiver. So I'm curious to see how this group will work out. But I like some of the moves they did, and they filled some voids. Like, again, Shaquille Griffin, Rayshawn Jenkins, they got a safety from the Chargers. He came over. He's a fine piece for safety. They could still use another safety. Roy Robertson Harris from the Bears, like that was a good signing for the defensive line. But again, they're starting to fill out this roster a little bit. They had a lot of money to work with, but there were also some head scratchers, like Jamal Agnew, paying him as much as they did. I didn't understand, but whatever.
Who do you think the biggest beneficiary to Trevor Lawrence going there in terms of the wide receiving core is going to be?
Ooh, it's got to be Laviska Shenault. But at the same time, it's really difficult because, again, you have a new regime in there, and they didn't draft him. They didn't draft DJ Chark. DJ Chark didn't have a very good year last year. 2019 weighs heavily on fantasy owners' minds because they just remember how good DJ Chark he flashed. With Gardner Minshew.
He was also hurt for a good part of the season too, which is
he was dealing with some sort of a abdomen issue, and then there was another injury that came up. We don't really know how serious those were because sometimes
those core muscle injuries are very tricky.
Well, that's another thing though. Laviska, if you remember, before right after the NFL draft, he had to have core muscle surgery, or it was right before the NFL draft. I can't remember, but that's why his rookie year, I didn't know what to expect because he had core muscle surgery, and it's like, okay, is it going to take some time? It's not a foot injury, it's not foot surgery, but it was like, how does this affect him?
It's literally everything you do. I remember Justin Verlander had it, and he was terrible for like an entire year and change after because he just didn't feel the same strength that he felt. And he just wasn't able to be the same pitcher he was. And he wasn't, there was a couple other players I remember in the last few years that have had core muscle issues. And it is one of those things that it's a big red flag. It's like when you hear turf toe and you go, oh, it's a turf toe. No. Turf toe is terrible. Like there's certain injuries that sound not or innocuous that are really, really bad injuries and have lingering effects sometimes with guys.
Yeah, for sure. And shout out to Juice0618. He said Richie Incognito's back. So apparently news came out an hour ago that he is back with the team. I think we were streaming at that point.
Yeah.
But good for you calling that out. So Richie Incognito. So now they're only replacing 3 of 5 starting instead of 4.
Well, it's better. It's not good, but it's better.
But Incognito he's a good guard. Like he's someone that I didn't know why they were going to get rid of, but it was apparently to try and rework his contract.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to some more of the depth guys here. Jamal Williams going to the Lions. Swift is still there, clearly. New head coach there. 2 years, $7.5 million for Jamal Williams. Is Jamal Williams any threat at all to Swift?
Not a threat, more of a depth piece. Like it's almost like an
Okay.
Aaron Jones situation, right? Where I mean, if they're smart, they'll use them in that kind of way. Like give DeAndre Swift his 18 touches per game or whatever, and give Jamal Williams, 10 touches per game. Jamal
Right.
Williams is a solid running back.
He is.
I don't think he sucks because I remember everybody when he came into the league and the Packers drafted both Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones. They were like, Aaron Jones is the better running back, and screw that guy, he sucks. He doesn't suck. Aaron Jones is just really damn good.
See, I'm glad you said that because that was one of those big war pieces. I remember,
Yep.
and you and I were on Team Aaron Jones, and then I remember you and I were on opposite ends on the Geronimo Allison MVS,
Yeah.
which honestly I could say didn't work out for either of us. I was on the MVS side, you were on the Allison side, but clearly some battles have no winners. But it wasn't that Jamal Williams was bad, just Aaron Jones was better. And you saw Jamal Williams be a useful piece, especially, I was always struck by how they would use him around in the red zone and the goal line areas because he was very efficient there. You'd look up and in a given season, he would have, half a dozen touchdowns. You say, where did that come from? And he would have these moments too where very useful in games. And I think he could be useful here in Detroit as well if indeed, and this is a big if they find ways to get him the football.
Yeah, and that's basically what it comes down to. But again, having Dan Campbell and a new coaching staff there's a lot of unknowns, and that can flip values on their heads. When that's a new regime. They didn't draft DeAndre Swift. Swift is a good football player. He's going to be good for a long time. But now under this new coaching staff, they signed a running back in free agency when there's plenty available in the draft. Like, if you draft a running back in the 5th, 6th round, they could be a perfect complement to DeAndre Swift. You don't need to sign Jamal Williams in free agency in order to have a competent sidekick. So that's my concern in terms for DeAndre Swift's like fantasy value. I worry about it a little bit because they did pay him $7.5 million. That's not a little bit of money.
That's why I asked the question. Is it a threat? Because I'm not trying to create a segment here. I'm legit asking the question because
it's enough.
It feels like it's enough to at least be concerned with.
It really is because like once you get into that tier of running backs where DeAndre Swift has been drafted right now, you have to have tiebreakers. You have to have things that say, okay, this is why we're going to lean this way. This is why we're going to lean that way. And this could be one of those things that just say, hey, if I'm torn between him and Cam Akers, maybe I take Cam Akers instead of DeAndre Swift, or like Clyde Edwards-Helaire or whatever running back that you're considering in that tier, because it's a big tier of running backs outside that those elite guys. And it's like, as my RB2, who do I want here? Or even a low end RB1. These guys are going in that tier, but it could be your tiebreaker.
All right, let's talk about Emmanuel Sanders going to the Bills. He's leaving the Saints on a 1-year, $6 million deal. I thought this was odd. Did you think this was an odd signing? I don't get this one. This was the one that kind of stuck out to me as peculiar. So how did you feel about this signing for the Buffalo Bills?
I wonder if the Bills tried to say, hey, John Brown, will you restructure your contract so we can keep you? Because I would prefer to have John Brown if you were able to work out the same money.
Who is now with Las Vegas, correct?
He did sign with Las Vegas, right, which is going to totally cloud. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Well, we'll get to him next.
But yeah, this one doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, just because I was like, all right, well, John Brown's leaving. Gabriel Davis flashed a little bit last year when he was out of the lineup, so it makes sense. You have Stephon Diggs, you have Gabriel Davis, you have Cole Beasley. Beasley's getting up there in age, so it's like, okay, but Emmanuel Sanders is up there in age, so it's like, I don't really get this one. If anything, it puts a little bit of water on the Gabriel Davis potential breakout season, because there's only so many targets to go around. This offense has to find the way to run the ball next year. I understand putting a lot on Josh Allen, and rightfully so. The way he played this year, it's hard for you to say that they shouldn't have done that. But at the same time, this is a team that reportedly is looking at tight ends. They inquired about Evan Ingram from the Giants, so they're looking to add a tight end. They
inquired about Gronk too. I had heard that they kicked the tires to get him to come home.
Yep, Pat Freiermuth is a guy that I think that we should be looking to, potentially going to them at the end of the first round. Because if Kyle Pitts wasn't in this draft, I think Freiermuth would be getting a lot more buzz, because he's that prototypical tight end, that big body, that guy that's built like a Travis Kelce, the guy that moves really well for his size. We could see them go there. So it's like all of a sudden it's like there's so many mouths that they're, and I can't fault them. It's like some people say you got to attack your weaknesses, like try and fix those spots. Some people say let's build our strengths. We know we're good at this. Let's continue to do that and build on that. It seems like the Bills are looking to build on that, and they want to throw the ball rather than grab a running back like a Chris Carson. I thought that maybe we might hear some rumblings about Chris Carson going to the Bills.
That makes sense to me. To me, that's where Chris Carson should end up. And if he doesn't, then the Bills should absolutely spend, I think, their first round pick on a running back. And I know some people will disagree with me on that, but to me, that's the missing piece. The secondary is very good. We can hem and haw about maybe they could use an extra corner. We could talk about that. But at the end of the day, they were right there. And I think the big difference for them is the ability to run the football. And Devin Singletary is not that guy. And Zach Moss, unfortunately, can't stay healthy. Doesn't look like that guy either. I have very little concerns about Etienne or Najee Harris. If you can get either of those two guys and add them to this offense, Tags, I mean, when you're playing Buffalo in January, you have to be able to run the football. I'm sorry. It's what you do. And if you go back and look historically at the best teams, it was the teams that, that had LaShawn McCoy, and even going back further, the Thurman Thomas days, where they were able to run with him and Kenneth Davis back in the day. And they just ran the ball, and obviously they had incredible quarterback play too. But you've got opportunity here. You're in a spot where the value on the board is running back. I think they should take the plunge and do it.
I honestly don't think those running backs are going to be available to him at 28. I right now I'm actually working through it, trying to figure out the mock after, as we learn more about.
Well, we just did one where one of them didn't go in the first round.
Right. And I'm changing on this. So basically the in terms of what the Steelers have done, what we've heard from beat reporters, what they're actually doing with meetings, they were at Travis Etienne's pro day. They had a virtual, intimate meeting with him off to the side after that. So they clearly are interested in him. He's not lasting until the second round. Okay. I have Damian Harris going to the Dolphins, and then I have Travis Etienne as a guy that Steelers 24. I think that's where I'm looking at him going.
Did you have Najee Harris? Because you said Damian Harris. I just want to be clear for everybody.
Oh yeah, Najee Harris. Damian Harris, obviously.
Because I love me some Damian Harris too. Don't
Damian
get me
Harris,
wrong.
Other Alabama running back.
Another Alabama Harris. Don't mix your Harrises, everybody. You want to keep your Harrises in Alabama straight as much as you can. But I know one person hears one thing and they start going, "Why did Tag say that?" Relax, everybody.
Right? Yeah,
we've been doing this 2 hours straight. This is not like TV where you get a commercial break and Mike can get up and go to the bath. No. This is it. We're here for the duration.
Yep.
Crushing football talk, so just relax. All right. Now, going back to what you were talking about, so you think these guys are going to be gone. So is Chris Carson become even more of an imperative then for Buffalo?
I mean, I think that they should look into it. They've tried to patch that hole in the third round in back-to-back drafts now with Devin Singletary, and it's clearly he's not the one. Zach Moss, I like Zach Moss, the running back, but he's had health concerns going back to college, and then now obviously in his first pro year, he's dealing with injuries again. So we could see them spend in free agency or attack it early in the draft. I think a cornerback or tight end is more likely for them at 28. But because they did release one of their starting cornerbacks, Levi Wallace, just I think yesterday, which was kind of puzzling, or they didn't pick up his option. But basically, outside of Tre'Davious White, they don't have anybody else, starting caliber on that team. So, but as for Emmanuel Sanders, what this means for his fantasy value, I mean, I'm not really going to be drafting him. I wasn't drafting him last year with the Saints. I said best case scenario is that Michael Thomas gets hurt and Emmanuel Sanders is like a wide receiver 3. And Dan gave me so much crap for that. He told me he's like, he'd be a top 20 receiver every week. And as it turned out, he was a wide receiver 3 when Michael Thomas was out. But he's 34 years old, I think now, playing behind Stephon Diggs. Cole Beasley's playing that slot role. Yeah, basically, he's taking over for John Brown, who he was kind of hit or miss, especially once Stephon Diggs came into the lineup.
Well, and here's the thing. If you get the running back position right, then Emmanuel Sanders becomes irrelevant, in my opinion. Because you have to balance out the offense a little bit for the long-term success of Josh Allen. And what you saw, too, is where it really started to show up, because almost all year you didn't see bad Josh Allen. And you know what I'm talking about. The Josh Allen that when he's under pressure, he runs back 5 yards, then twists and turns and runs back 10 more, and then tries to make a play. That was the Josh Allen. It was bad Josh Allen. Bad Josh Allen. That's the Josh Allen of 18 and beginning of 19 that you were saying, okay, if you could just get this under wraps. And then he did, but I think there was so much pressure on him to always be the guy making the play. It started to creep back into his psyche because it's the playoffs and you're playing at a higher level and all these things are going on. But if you could just run the football efficiently, I think that takes a lot of that pressure. It starts to just, it balances out the offense, and also it allows the defense to do what it does best too, because that's a good defense in Buffalo. So Carson's one of those big-time free agents we're waiting on. We would like to have had him right now. Galladay, there's rumors still. If you're buying some of the rumors to the Giants, I don't usually like to do this, but you know what? We're still waiting on a lot more news. So tell me, is Galladay to the Giants, if indeed that were to happen, what does that do for Galladay's value, for Daniel Jones' value, and overall for this Giants offense?
I want to know why we have not heard. We hear about the Jets, we hear about the Broncos, the Falcons, the Washington, the Bears, about quarterback, being teams that could trade up for quarterbacks, trade for a quarterback. Why haven't we heard that about the Giants potentially doing? Are we really, really saying Daniel Jones is the guy. I mean, I could see them adding another weapon to say, hey, we're going to give this guy every opportunity to show us what he can do. But based on what we've seen over the 2 years that he's been in the league, he ain't it. Not in my opinion. He's not.
It's tough because the numbers with Saquon on the field and without him are very drastic. And you know that, and I know that.
Yeah, and Saquon was even a disappointment in 2019. This offense, they've gone through so many changes, but
he came back too soon from that high ankle sprain. I think that was that. He pushed it too much because he's a gamer, and you love that about him.
Same thing that year,
yeah, and you love that about him, but it hurt him. It hurt his value overall because you had him in lineups, and then it wasn't good because he wasn't healthy enough to go. And then by the last month, it was better. But the stats bear for themselves with Saquon without, but. You could say that of a lot of quarterbacks when they lose their starting running back. So that's kind of a little passe, I guess, at the same time. Let's talk about Will Fuller, another name, too, not getting maybe the amount of buzz. I mean, if I'm the Texans, I want to bring Will Fuller back into the fold, but it just feels like the Texans, I mean, you're talking about no plan. I have no idea here. I'm at a loss with Will Fuller because this is also a very tough player to make an investment in, not just in fantasy. This is when our fantasy kind of bleeds over into the reality of the NFL because NFL GMs know this. Will Fuller, very good talent. Will Fuller catch touchdowns. Will Fuller can be a wide receiver 1, but Will Fuller obviously spent a lot of time being off the field because being hurt, and now the PED suspension, which is, I mean, it's tough to get. How many guys get dinged for a PED suspension in the NFL? We all see what the body types in the NFL are. So I don't know what was going on there, what he was doing, but it's a tough situation because if we had finished out the season, do you think you would have had more people on Will Fuller in terms of these free agents, general managers looking at him?
I mean, apparently, this is why we're waiting on that first big wide receiver to sign a deal because
then the dominoes fall.
Yeah, and according behind the scenes, they're saying wide receiver money is just not there. Like teams that are out there trying to get these guys, that the money is not even close to what they expected, and that's a real thing. It's been a thing for the last couple of years. You like going back to Alshon Jeffrey when he had to sign, and some of these other wide receivers, you're kind of like, wow, I thought they'd get more money. But in reality, teams are using more and more wide receivers in the field, and that alpha is not maybe not as important. And I don't think Juju's that guy. Galladay is that guy. He's that X wide receiver, the guy that you could throw it up to in those one-on-one situations. So Fuller's not that guy. He's the guy that's going to stretch the field for you. He can play underneath as well, obviously. I have no idea why Houston, if they really are digging their feet in and saying, hey, we're sticking with Deshaun Watson, we're not trading him, you should be doing everything in your power to sign Will Fuller because that's one of his guys. Apparently, they were in on John Brown. Before the Raiders signed him, that they were trying to acquire him. So I don't know if that was basically they were trying to get the replacement for Will Fuller or what, but it's really weird that we haven't heard anything out there about Will Fuller just yet. But if he goes, this is not helping Deshaun Watson come back to that Houston team. I'm telling you right now.
I mean, the roster right now it is so difficult. They have no picks. They have cap problems. I mean, it's a disaster. There's a part of me that thinks the best thing for the organization, as heartbreaking as it's going to be to them for give up on a franchise quarterback because they're so hard to find, is to take the 3 first-round picks. It's to remake the organization. Just say, you know what? We went all in. We handed the reins to a lunatic, and Bill O'Brien had failed. And you know what? We're going to have to kind of figure it out again and start over. It feels like that's the path actually that's probably the smartest thing to do right now because I don't see how they are competitive in the next 2 to 3 year window with the lack of picks, with the cap issues they have, with the lack of talent, and most importantly, probably with the tone of what's going on with this team. You need to kind of scrap everything because the negativity surrounding this team, when you have JJ Watt, the highest character guy in the NFL, wanting out, that's a bad sign. When you have Deshaun Watson, young franchise quarterback superstar, wanting out, that is bad. Is a bad situation right now. It's a bad culture with the Texans. And I think the best thing to do is just turn the page, be bad for a couple of years, and rebuild the damn thing. Let's talk about Kenyon Drake for a moment, too. Do you think he ends up back with the Cardinals? I know we kind of talked about it, but the longer it goes on, does it end up becoming maybe the Falcons or somewhere like that?
No, my prediction was the Cardinals all along. I feel like they're a team that's not going to spend a whole lot of money on a running back in free agency. They have some other needs that they can go to in the draft that it always made sense. Like he's familiar with the system. I think they would want him back on a cheaper deal. The Falcons don't have any money to spend. But going back to real quick, Will Fuller, the team that I would love to see him go to is the Tennessee Titans.
There's a need there. Well, here's the thing. Now, Tennessee has lost Corey Davis. So is Will Fuller first on that list in your opinion, or is it a Juju or somebody else?
No, I think Will Fuller is perfect complement to what AJ Brown does. I think Fuller would have fit in with the Jets opposite, Denzel Mims. Then you have Jamison Crowder doing the underneath work. I just again, I like complementing wide receivers and finding wide receivers that do different things. So looking, AJ Brown is a guy that's catching the ball underneath. He's doing work after the catch. Like he's Anquan Bolden-esque in terms of like he's a tough man to bring down. Where Will Fuller can create a lot of different things for you. Yes, he can catch underneath, but he's a field stretcher and he opens up things for Derrick Henry. You can't bring 8-9 men down in the box and say, hey, we're going to leave Will Fuller and AJ Brown out in single man coverage on the perimeter. You can't do that. If you do, you're going to get eaten alive. Everybody knows it. So it would clear things out a little bit. Whereas Corey Davis didn't really do that for you. So, that's where I want to see him go. And the Titans, I just pulled it up. The Titans, as of right now, according to Spot Track, they have $23.3 million available of cap space. So they're number 10 in the league. So they have room to do it. The Kansas City Chiefs are a team that has money to do it. They need a wide receiver. So these big names, again, these dominoes are going to fall quick. Once one guy signs, I think we're going to start to see the dominoes fall and people like, okay, the market's set. We know what we can get and kind of go from there.
What about for T.Y. Hilton, Curtis Samuel? These are two wide receivers. I think it's very specific right now where they could land and be successful. So do you have landing spots that you would like to see in a perfect world them end up?
I think Carolina is where Curtis Samuel should stay.
I said the same thing today. Someone asked me, what do you think about Curtis Samuel? I said, honestly, I think he should stay put right where he is because I think that is the best scenario because I feel like they finally last year towards the second half of the season unlocked that key.
Yep. And that they figured out they know the way to use that guy to maximize his strengths. Whereas people were connecting the dots to Washington with Ron Rivera and Scott Turner. You don't want that. You really don't want that because Scott Turner had no idea how to use Curtis Samuel. You don't. So honestly, I just want to see him back in Carolina because I think that team can grow. And if they add a young quarterback like a Trey Lance, let him sit behind Bridgewater for a year, half a year, whatever you have to do, because it seems like they're getting Deshaun Watson or they're drafting a quarterback one way or the other. They're going to have a different quarterback in 2022 at the latest. So I would like to see him go back there because I think him, DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, who is entering the final year of his contract. I think they make a good trio and that coaching staff they learn how to use those guys like to the best of their abilities in year one.
Mm-hmm. And what about T.Y. Hilton? Do you think there's anything left in that tank that a team's going to take that plunge with him?
I felt like the Packers are a team that should kick the tires on him.
That makes a lot of sense. That's the first, T.Y. to the Packers that I've heard. That makes a ton of sense. Like, why not just try 1 year, keep it simple, come win a championship, try to figure it out, and you're at least getting a veteran who knows what he's doing, and he doesn't have to be the guy.
Yeah, I don't think it would be great for a fantasy perspective for him to go there. I think it'd be fine. But T.Y. is someone that's taken some time to build chemistry with his quarterbacks, and it'd be a new offense, going to learn a brand new offense. But from a football standpoint, I think the Packers would be wise to add someone like that to complement. Again, Devontae Adams is still going to be your guy, but T.Y. Hilton adds a level of a stability to your wide receiver core that you don't have with Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Valdes-Scantling can give you those big plays, and he's going to pop off from time to time.
He can.
He's also the ball, though. Kill you at other times where he's going to drop balls that you're kind of like,
yeah, the drop. He's one of those guys where the easy ones are not easy, and the hard ones you shake your head and you say, "How did that happen?" The Giants did make a wide receiver signing too. They did bring in John Ross, the speedster. I mean, is this fantasy relevant in your opinion? Because I know they're looking for somebody to play on the outside. They have Shepard in the slot. You hope that you bring back some a healthy Saquon Barkley this year. But do you think Ross is somebody that you think actually can contribute at all?
I was a John Ross fan coming out of college, but I think the ship has sailed. I mean, if you don't produce in your first, 4 years of the league, I think you're done. And unfortunately, I think he's done. Because the Giants, not only, they did cut Golden Tate. So basically, as of right now, John Ross is competing with Dante Pettis for a starting position, which I don't think the Giants go into the season with those guys as starters. I think that the Giants, the two players that I keep going back to for them are either Devonta Smith or Kyle Pitts. If Kyle Pitts is there, they're going to draft him number 11 or 12 they are. And if he's not, then I think Devonta Smith is a guy that they would draft because, again, John Ross as a starter, relying on him as a starter right now. Just ask the Bengals how that worked out.
It's tough. The more we hear Kyle Pitts' name, the more we hear just that draft stock, I feel like going up and up and up. And it feels like he could be that huge difference making weapon. I know he's not a free agent there, but where do you think he does end up in terms of, the offensive standpoint for him?
Well, I mean, rookie tight ends just don't make splashes. I
I
think we
know, and
all,
that's the thing. Like, I feel like we're getting ourselves all worked up about Kyle Pitts, and I'm only talking about
Mhm.
because you mentioned him. And I feel
Yeah,
like the NFL folks are getting all hyped up about him, and rightfully so, because the projectability is incredible.
yeah.
But that seems to be having like a negative effect sometimes in the fantasy realm because it does typically take these guys a little bit while longer to figure it out.
Yeah, no, the places that I was looking at for him that I don't think he gets past the Giants at 11. I think that's where we're looking for him to go, and the Giants trade Evan Ingram. I honestly think the Bengals are a team at 5 that might even consider Kyle Pitts. Because again, just trying to build around Joe Burrow, just saying we're going to build
That's
on a series
quite a
out of strength.
piece.
Now,
That's quite a
yeah,
piece.
I mean, right now it's really tough to pass on an offensive tackle for them, especially since Miami just traded for Isaiah Wilson. So it's like, all right, Miami's probably not going to take a tackle at 3. They might trade out of that pick, but at 5, I'm anticipating a tackle for the Bengals, but Pitts, he would make some sense at a position of need. The Eagles, people want to throw out the Eagles there. I don't see the Eagles. You know, they say, oh, they run a whole lot of 2 tight end sets. It's not the same coaching staff anymore. Stop talking about that. It's a new team. Like they may not be running that. They have Dallas Goedert. He's a perfectly fine tight end. You have a
Right.
lot of other needs on that team to address, including wide receiver. So the Giants at 11 are the team that I would probably say Pitts. But in dynasty, from a dynasty standpoint, Kyle Pitts probably should be drafted as a top 10 tight end already. But in redraft leagues, I won't be going near him.
I know this is kind of difficult because, there's still so many names to shake out here, but so far, who's winning free agency in your opinion? What teams have done a good job here? You like what they've done?
I mean, it's
I
really
like what the
difficult.
Jets have done, to be honest with you.
The Jets, I actually do. I think that the Chargers have done a good job. Corey Linsley, that's signing there. Matt
Mhm.
Feiler. There's still a lot of signings to take place. There's a lot of teams throwing out a lot of money, so a lot of people will say that the Patriots have won it. I think that they overpaid in some of their players. I do think that they set themselves up better for the draft, and they had a lot of money to spend. But I'm with you. I think the Jets have had a good free agency to this point. The Chargers, I think, have had a good free agency. Yeah, I mean, again, we're waiting for a lot of these pieces to fall. It's easy to
Mhm.
say that the Patriots or the
Well,
Jags
none of them
because they
are.
spent a lot of money.
I guess Galladay is the closest thing. But even Galladay, premium free agent, I don't know if that's what I would call him necessarily. Do you think that's just the way this class is, that there isn't really a premium guy? I mean, Aaron Jones, maybe close. I mean, it's kind of difficult because in terms of star power, I think Kenny Galladay has that ability to be a superstar. Injuries have kind of held that back a little bit, maybe the lack of separation, as you pointed out before, but it doesn't feel like a huge star class. It feels like Galladay's kind of at the top, and then, it's the Kenyon Drakes of the world, the Chris Carsons of the world. So next year, maybe a little bit different of a feeling, but is that kind of also what's holding it back? Because there really isn't that guy that is that game-changing free agent that organizations look at.
I felt like the wide receiver free agent class was pretty good. I mean, obviously, Allen Robinson and Chris Godwin getting franchised, that obviously hurt
Right.
in terms of the overall market. But Galladay is one of those guys that I do consider him a top tier free agent. He's a guy that, again, he's that guy. He can be the guy in an offense, even if he doesn't generate a whole lot of separation. He does win those contested catch situations. Juju is not a number 1. He should be a big slot receiver. That's basically where he wins. He's one of those guys that's heavily reliant on slot targets, not perimeter. He's not very good out there. Will Fuller, again, he's not really a number 1, but he's a guy that can be a 1 at times, if that makes sense.
Right.
But I would like him more as a complementary piece to someone like, AJ Brown. I think that those two would mesh really well together. But the running back class underwhelming outside of Aaron Jones. And that's going to be the case going forward, though, because
Sure.
all of a sudden you're looking around the league and you're saying there's decent running backs that are not going to have jobs. And then there's like all of a sudden we're going to have the incoming class of running backs. There's some good running backs in this class where it's like they have to go somewhere. And that means some people are going to be left without jobs. One of the players that I predicted in my free agent primer piece was that Leonard Fournette would go to the Seahawks. Now, reportedly, the Bucs are trying to sign him again, but the Seahawks have also made him an offer. If he goes to the Seahawks, that's something to watch because they want to run the ball. Russell Wilson clears lanes.
Right.
That's the reason that those running backs have a lot of success. Russell Wilson does that. So if he goes there, he might make a bigger impact than people think.
I think that would be a great landing spot for them. Look,
Yeah.
we all know the Falcons need running back. We all like the Bills to get some running back situation straightened out there finally as well, the Atlanta Falcons. So there's enough backs left around in this pool to go around. Somebody, like you said, is going to be left without a running back too. But that's what the draft is for, and there's still a lot to come there. Who's the loser so far for you? Is it the Raiders losing so many guys on their line, or just overall, is it a team that just really hasn't done anything that maybe should have?
It's the Raiders or Houston, honestly. Looking at Houston, the players they've signed, it almost feels like a team that's just trying to lose football games. And I know that's terrible to say because they're not actively trying to do that. But when I look at the signings they make, every single one I'm puzzled by. Like Mark Ingram, when you already have an aging running back in David Johnson. Andre Roberts, you paid him a lot more than you should have. Like a return specialist on a team that's rebuilding. That makes a lot of sense. Marcus Cannon, whatever. Justin McCray, Justin Britt, Malik Collins, Jack Lawson, Kevin Pierre-Louis, Christian Kirksey. No, I'm looking like legitimately. I'm going through this. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, it feels like a team that's just trying to fill out their roster and spend some money so that they hit the salary cap requirements and say, we're losing this year. We don't give a crap. Like, hold out Deshaun Watson because we're going to have the number 1 pick in 2022.
And look, I want to remind everybody too, is just trying to keep up to date with all the latest going on with all the fantasy signings. Make sure you go get the Fantasy News app by Fantasy Pros. Again, that app is on the Apple Store and Google Play. Just download it. It's free. It's fantastic. Again, Fantasy News by Fantasy Pros. That's the app. And also a shout out to our news desk team. All the write-ups, all the quick reactions, everything's been going on there. Fantasy Pros has done a phenomenal job, the staff here, of keeping up and giving you not only where the guys are going, but how it affects your fantasy team. And we know from your dynasty perspective, from your redraft, we got you covered here with everything. You can always follow us on Twitter as well at Fantasy Pros, as well as Instagram also. And reminding everybody too, there's still time to get involved over for that free jersey giveaway for Lamar Jackson. Again, go to fantasypros.com/contest. It's going to be a very simple thing. Once again, thanks to our friends at Pristine Auction. All you got to do a review on Apple Podcasts or CastBox, and then you take that review, you go and you plug it in over on the fantasypros.com/contest, and you can go and get entered to win that Lamar Jackson autographed jersey. Thanks again to Pristine Auction, DraftKings, and everybody else who worked so hard. And I want to do a special shout out here to our boy Chris also, who phenomenal job here setting up all the graphics, making everything just so spectacular for us. A seamless 2 hours of fantasy football goodness. So big shout out to Chris. He always does so much work here, and it takes a lot of effort to make us look so good, believe me. And Chris does a great job of that. He's shaking his head. No, it doesn't. Oh, you go on. So happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody too. I know it's St. Patty's Day. If you're celebrating out there, enjoy, celebrate safely. Tags, any final thoughts before we close things out here today?
Rock on. That's it.
Love it. Rock on. It doesn't get better than that. I can't follow that. That'll do it for us. But the story of the game goes on. For Tags, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.